Hello once again, YouTube. Um, I am just setting up to be able to see all of your chats. Should you want to chat me as I'm doing this, my phone is set up. I can see everything you're saying, and yeah, we'll make this a discussion. Anyways, there I am. You can see me like a couple minutes ago, I guess. Um, Jordy Weeds will not be joining us because, as he said, his cousin wanted him to watch playoff hockey in a pub. And I told him that the only way that that would sound any more Canuck is if he were dating said cousin. So, back on track from last night, spending over 3 hours reading the 2018 Colorado Democratic Party platform and trying to do my due diligence in front of you all before I go ahead and vote on this thing, because it was emailed out to me and we vote tomorrow morning, and I want to be sure that I have this thing read and at least give each of the platform planks some thought. Unlike probably every one of your politicians that serves you, who gets things handed to them and then some whip comes along and says, hey, vote for this or else you won't get any money from our political PACs that give out money for campaigns for everyone who's loyal. So since I'm not bought and paid for, I'm going to actually do my due diligence for you guys. As your resident world's worst social justice warrior, check out my t-shirt. Yes, I am a Doctor Who fan, especially now that the Doctor is a lady, you know. So I'm showing my Doctor Who pride. Even though I bought this before the Doctor became a lady, I'm wearing it afterwards. So there you go. Poke fun all you want. Anyways, in case somebody drops in, I'll put my headset on and I'll be able to hear what they're saying. Nick Bravo has PM'd me and would like in. He did not tell me which platform he used to PM me, but I'm going to guess maybe Twitter, maybe, or maybe it was Facebook. I accept all sorts of different social media in that way, but let's see. No, it was Facebook. Okay, so we're going to let him in. Since we let Thomas Romaine in last night, I think it's only fair that we let Nick Bravo in to help comment on things today. And let's get back to the screen I was on. Okay. So, tomorrow morning, I go and vote on a bunch of things. There's 5 different political offices that I will be voting on. The most important of which is Kerry Kennedy versus Jared Polis. Who are we going to send forth as our nomination to be the next governor of Colorado? This would be from the Democratic Party, right? And Jared Polis, well, his is the same on both sides. Kerry Kennedy has this neato slogan on the back that says, hashtag when women lead. Go ahead and screenshot this frame right here and then make fun of me later on Twitter. Go ahead. I don't mind. But this is the big showdown. And it is kind of a microcosm of the 2016 presidential election in that Jared Polis is kind of like Bernie Sanders and Kerry Kennedy is more like, well, Hillary Clinton. You know, especially the whole making a hashtag about gender politics, you know. But as far as their actual political leanings, I think both of them are kind of a mix between the two candidates that ran in 2016 for president, but they're both running for governor. And Jared Polis actually has the pipe fitters union behind him. And because I am a former union worker and I do like unions, that speaks to me a lot. And also my girlfriend, who is one of my most important constituents, she really likes Jared Polis. So she's got a lot of pull with me. And she likes to share Jared Polis posts from Facebook. So I see a lot of him because I monitor her feed as well. So Propter Hawk wants in, and I imagine he's sent this message on YouTube, and he did, and there's the link off to him as well. And so he'll be helping us to determine where we stand on these issues as well. He was in last night, was a real trooper, spent over 3 hours with me, even though Propter is Canadian. Why would we listen to Canadians as far as how we want to run our country? You can ask Propter. But I found him to be knowledgeable. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
So you don't have to worry about your camera being on for this one because most of it's going to be a screen share from me because we're just going over the Democratic Party platform.
That's good.
As it was emailed to me, okay? And Proctor should be here in a couple minutes when he gets his stuff together. And we're going to go over to my screen share of where we left off for the party platform. Okay? Here we go. Okay. You're going to love which part we left off on, Nick. Part 2, criminal justice. This is where the Democratic Party stands on criminal justice issues. So, Part 2, subsection 1, we call on our local, state, and federal elected officials to work together to implement juvenile justice reform. 1, interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline and eliminate zero-tolerance policies in school. Right. Welcome, Proctor.
Hello. Good evening, everyone.
So how do you feel about eliminating zero-tolerance policies in order to try to help curb people going to prison straight from school?
Huh. That's interesting. So zero-tolerance policies. Well, what sort of things are we talking about in Colorado? Like what would be some examples specifically?
Specifically, I believe there is a zero-tolerance policy for bringing a gun to school, especially in the wake of mass shootings such as Columbine, which were historical in our country. Mm-hmm. I think if you bring a gun to school as a kid, if it was found in your locker, you are expelled from that school.
And they want to do away with this? These zero tolerance things?
Well, that would be just one example of zero tolerance, but there might also be like zero tolerance for if you were to try to post a poster around school that was not approved by the approving body. There are when people are running for office for student government, they have to go to their principal and get a stamp on every poster that they want to put up. The principal has a stamp, and if that stamp is not present, then the person who put up that poster, if they find out who did it via the security cameras, that person can be expelled. One such person that I know of they were making a parody of a counseling service from students, like student counseling, peer counseling, whereby the students who made the peer counseling group for like homeroom time, they had this poster that said "Mediate the hate," and this prankster went around with a parody poster which said "Instigate the hate." But they took the original poster down, photo scanned it in, and used Photoshop to turn it into "Instigate the hate," and actually reproduced the stamp from that vice principal who approved it. And so, because they basically forged the principal's approval onto it, that person was expelled from school.
Okay. Well, I see the problem with how they've framed this is those two things are like those are two examples of two vastly different things. I mean,
yes. And both of them are zero tolerance things. One of them being joking about social justice issues such as racial discrimination, which is what that counseling group was trying to get at by mediate the hate, you know, right. Making fun of racial issues or bringing a gun to school either have zero tolerance policies.
Yeah, well, like what we've seen with a lot of these things, we cover a lot of ground in a single bullet point. So something, for example, like your first example with the guns, that's an understandable zero tolerance policy. Like given, especially the current circumstances, it's pretty understandable why a school would say, you know what, we don't want kids bringing guns to school. Yeah. But in the second case, that's obviously a lot less serious. That's, like, do we want to run everything at that level, even on things that are that small? I wouldn't say trivial. I mean, those are things that are, like the school elections and student councils and stuff are an important part of that structure. I don't want to demean it, but when in comparison to other things like the first example, it is quite trivial in comparison. Like, should students, because again, like expelling students or taking them out of school, that should be a serious, I mean, that can set a precedent in that person's life and their behavior and stuff. So, making a goofy poster, should we take somebody out of the education system or isolate them from it, just for this, for the sake of honoring this sort of zero tolerance thing? I think that's probably more destructive to students, and could even, in fact, you might even be able to make a case that it would encourage a school to prison pipeline, like taking somebody out of school and putting them on the street. So those two things are those two examples are very, very different. One, I think most people would be empathetic to. The second, it would be a mixed bag. I mean, some people would agree with it, but when we sort of umbrella these things and say, well, all zero tolerance things, it's like, well, we kind of hurt ourselves, because some things we might want to be zero tolerance on. Other things, it would be destructive to be zero tolerance on. So when they sort of do this umbrella thing, it's like we don't really get anywhere.
I have a slight point. The second one strikes me as a First Amendment issue, freedom of speech, because now I'll admit, I agree, we need to keep guns off campuses. However, there's a difference between an actual gun and the representation of a gun when we start, or any other weapon or whatever. So the minute that we sit there and say, you can't see these things, you automatically are stifling free speech, but then also you're starting to move towards you're not allowed to think certain things. And my big concern is that we could be drifting to a situation where you are locked up for thinking certain things, having certain beliefs. So that is my big concern, because I don't see a lot of people looking at a lot of these things with the flavoring of context. There's there's all kinds of news articles where some kid wears a necklace that has like a little, the jewelry is like a little gun, or the kid, makes a gun with his finger when he's playing tag with his friends on the playground, and automatically, cops are called, children are arrested. All this drama happens that should not be happening in any way, shape, or form. Because what happens then is you draw a gun or any weapon, you do something like that, and the cops get called, the cops have to write a report. Automatically, that 5 or 7 year old automatically has a record. Then, any interaction, any contact with police or state bureaucracies sees that child has a record, and then it starts piling on. Because what happens is then teachers and other authority figures are looking for problematic behavior, and if they're looking for it, more often than not they're going to find it, whether it's real or not. So that's my I'm really against anything that's going to censor freedom of speech.
So for me, this plank one in part two, I agree with the interrupt the school to prison pipeline portion of the sentence, but the and eliminate zero tolerance policies, I believe we should just give principals some deference and just treat each instance as an individual situation and not put a hard, fast rule on whether or not to enforce a zero tolerance policy, because the principal is in the best position to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Well, you also have to look at nonviolent crimes, because if you look at the prison industrial complex, most people in for drug crimes, nonviolent crimes. There are some, I'm not sure the exact statistics, but the number of people that are actually violent criminals is very low compared to the number of people doing serious time for non-violent crimes. So I think we really need to focus on that as well.
So number two is support effective violence and bullying prevention programs in schools. I like that, especially the word effective.
Yeah, that does draw an underline. That really draws an underline under. It's a little more. That one's a little more solid in what it's trying to elicit. Now, I guess of course the operative term there is bullying. Like, how are they defining bullying? Like, what does that mean specifically? Like, because everybody has a different threshold as to what that is. So, a reasonable measure, like if kids are just beating on other kids and you have this sort of problem, that's something that's really serious. That's something that has to be addressed. But something like, well, let's say some kid has these particular political views and they're very vocal about them, and the other kids are offended by them, and the teachers consider that a bullying thing, then that's something that has to be unpacked a little bit more, I think. But I guess it really depends on what it is exactly they're referring to. Because when we think of bullying, that has a pretty specific connotation. It's larger kids picking on smaller kids, or kids that have particular disabilities, or like that sort of
up on one person.
Yeah. So you have that sort of connotation. It's like, that should just be. I mean, that's the school's job to not facilitate an environment where kids are constantly being abused and beaten by other students. So I guess it depends mostly. I guess the asterisk I'd put on that is just what exactly are they referring to as bullying? Like, is bullying hearing things you don't, or views you disagree with? We're sort of circling around that type of policy. Like, is that considered bullying as well? That would be my only concern with it, is just where do we set the threshold of that?
Yeah. Number 3, advocate for uniform evidence-based protocols so that youth who are accused of a crime and who are at low risk to the community are not incarcerated. Support restorative justice and alternative sentencing. I definitely agree with that, in that if you take someone who is a teenager who gets caught with drugs on them and you settle them with a felony rather than give them counseling, you're just creating a felon for life.
Yeah.
Because they'll have far less job prospects and you're just making their whole life worse, putting a ball and chain on them for the rest of their lives.
And you're also hurting their odds of getting into better schools in the future, or if they're going to do post-secondary school. When you have that sort of record following you around, it could certainly impair your future prospects of improving yourself. So, a kid that brought a little bit of pot to school or something, it's like, okay, well, I think the response to that should be proportional. Like if a kid brings a gun to school, that's one thing. If a kid brings a little bit of, pot to school, or, or a dirty magazine, or, something that kids tend to do. I mean, that's part of the growing up aspect of things. How severely we react to that, I think, is where that precedent is set.
You are just showing your age, man. What kid in high school do you think brings a dirty magazine to school and all they have to do is use their cell phone to go look at some free porn online?
Well, maybe you got a lot of hipsters. They like doing old school stuff. I mean, kids bring records to school, I imagine. Like, hey,
I hope half your head is gray, because when you go to porn magazines, I'm like, for real, porn mag? Who looks at porn magazines anymore? You are so old.
Yeah, I got to give you that. That is a pretty antiquated position.
So my comment on that is basically we have to not only look at what a crime is and then the intention. Obviously, if some kid brings a gun to school, the intent's going to be a lot more serious. Well, are they planning to shoot a teacher? Are they planning on shooting a bully? Are they, what are they doing with it? Whereas pot, that's a pretty non-violent, ambiguous substance. It's not that big of a deal. So I think we also have to look at what are considered crimes. Now, you can consider, and then of course we can, if you break into philosophy, you can say, well, what are ethics versus laws? Laws tend to be, in my view, preferences of the powerful. And I mean, is it ethical for a kid to bring an ounce of pot to school? Maybe. Is it illegal? Well, in certain states, yeah, of course. So again, we're going back to how do we determine intent? Now, as far as turning kids into felons, you can have a felony and be nonviolent, but the way your society is going to treat you, that's a bigger problem than say a kid gets a felony, goes to prison for a year. Well, after that year, the state's done with them, but the society, once upon discovering that they're a felon, the effects of that can last the rest of their lives, which of course can lead them to more criminal behavior because they figure, well, I'm screwed already. Therefore, it doesn't matter what I do. And when you're dealing with underdeveloped minds like children who can't really comprehend the future, that they can't really think a year or 5 years or 10 years from their present moment, you have to educate them in order so that they make better choices. But then again, that goes back to creating a healthier environment for the children, which means, the educational system seeing children as what I do not believe it sees them as now. Right now, it looks at them as products. It looks at them as enemies, as a problem. It does not look at them as an opportunity to create a better world.
So in the comments, Poseidon Kicklodon wants to know, as a side note, how many strains of Colorado pot have been named after Trump so far. And I just have to say that I haven't been in a dispensary since he's been elected. But I'd say that maybe Orange Hulk.
Yeah. Probably a lot.
Yeah, probably a lot, but I'd have to actually go into a dispensary to find out. Number 4, eliminate the ability of district attorneys to directly file a juvenile case into adult court without judicial review and without an opportunity for defense or appeal, and ensure that juveniles who are or have been sentenced to life in prison be able to seek parole after 40 years. And that's another case of bad grammar in the sentence.
Yeah, that one's a little bit of a...
I added some words that weren't there because my brain just kind of fills in the gaps. But yeah, again, written poorly. But I think this is one of those things where I agree with the sentiment here that when someone is, say, tried for murder at 15, they might be a completely different person when they are, this would be 55, that they would be eligible for parole. If they're in prison for 40 years, they might be a completely rehabilitated person. They might, deserve the chance to actually breathe outside of bars. My problem with it being a platform plank is how many kids does this actually apply to per year here in Colorado?
Yeah, and there's a contradiction in principles in that too, because if one side, for example, says that the prison system is a rehabilitation center of sorts, if somebody's operating on that, which I think a lot of the more Democrat principles would be that it's not, that it's a prison for profit thing. It's just incarceration. It's it's just taking people out of society that are dangerous with not necessarily a rehabilitation slant to it. So if the idea is that it's not a rehabilitation center, it's just an incarceration facility, that yeah, there's problems with that. It doesn't hold up, because essentially at that point it's like, well, why would you hold a kid for that long, for 40 years, and then after 40 assume that a rehabilitation process has actually occurred? So if you have the principle that
they're not assuming that, they're making them eligible for parole.
Yeah, but I mean, we would sort of.
I think the parole hearing determines whether or not they are actually rehabilitated enough to deserve a chance.
Yeah, so
this would just give them the opportunity at a parole hearing.
But I would assume that is bringing in, an assumption of rehabilitation occurring, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't have that as a principle, that prison systems are not rehabilitation facilities, it almost seems like waiting 40 years of just being incarcerated almost seems like it's almost a lost cause. If I just look at that as it's written, it seems there's a couple things going on there that might not be particularly compatible with other democratic principles.
So I just stopped screen share for this special moment because it's the day before the election and I'm a delegate. People are calling me all day. And so I'm going to return the phone call on this person and see what they have to say.
Hello, this is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl. This is Mike. You just called me?
Oh, it's the Martinez residence?
No, at the Clifton residence.
Oh, okay. I'm a volunteer for the Jenna Griswold campaign. So once I move on, I can't go back to see who I called.
Oh, okay.
So thank you for calling. Thank you for calling me back. We are just volunteering on behalf of Jenna, wanting to know if people are familiar with her or if you need any information prior to tomorrow's assembly.
Actually, I'm going over the platform planks right now,
Okay.
just to do my due diligence of, having actually had read them before we vote.
Yeah.
Having been
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
having been a member of the Republican Party down in El Paso County before, just because that's the only way you can get anything done. I saw the way that they do it, and I'm kind of not happy with the way that the agenda proposes that we vote on these things, because what I'm used to is like a Scantron where people vote on line by line issues, and this is just going to be vote by acclamation on the entire platform, yay or nay.
Okay, now I didn't know that. Now, this is my first time getting involved.
Yeah, well, mine too in the Democratic Party. I felt like finally I moved up to Denver and I could be part of the party that I actually like. And I'm finding that there's some things that are strange, because the whole process that we were emailed as delegates for trying to change a platform plank, you have to go around and get 13 signatures from the people who wrote the platform and try to find them before 10 a.m.
Oh
So
my
basically, there's no chance for us to amend the platform. It's just yay or nay, all or nothing.
Okay, well, I hate to say this, but that's kind of all Greek to me. I've never been to a state assembly.
Well, it's Greek to me too. That's why I'm trying to go through all this.
Yeah, I would encourage you, if you decide that you even want to go ahead and go tomorrow, I would encourage you to stop by Jenna's area and tell her this. And, because she is running for Secretary of State, it seems like this is right up her alley, that she would have some idea what to do about it, change the system.
Well, I definitely would like to talk to her about it. I just don't think we can change anything for this 2-year cycle. It'd have to be for the next cycle, and even then, it would probably take a very planned out, concerted effort to change the way things are done in the assembly when you have to vote on it in the assembly. You've got to have all your ducks in a row with a whole bunch of other delegates getting together to do this. But
I know everyone that I talked to has said that they're really studying and doing their research on all of this. So I'm sorry that I can't help you, but I really do hope you can get in touch with Jenna tomorrow.
Well, I think Jenna's chances are pretty good against Villard. I haven't. Of all the people that have been calling me, I haven't heard anyone from him.
Okay, I'll be darned.
So, and I've gotten a lot of phone calls, and one from Jenna herself.
Oh, okay.
But no one from him.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. I was at a forum one night where they both spoke, and that's why I had to put my support behind Jenna. She's very dynamic and energetic, and she has a lot of experience in the things that she'll be dealing with in the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah.
So I had no idea how the delegate process works, though. So I hope it's not all for naught. Then it sounds like nothing can really be accomplished tomorrow.
Yeah, I've been thinking that it's more like just political theater.
Oh dear, that's a waste of time.
Yeah.
Shoot. Well, I know there are a lot of people that went today. It started at 1, and I think it goes to like 8 to 9, and then tomorrow, it starts all over again. So I don't know if everybody's gonna, run into what you're running into or not. I just am so unfamiliar with the process. I was just trying to do my part in, helping the Democratic Party get some people in there, because things seem to be falling apart in my mind and what's going on in Washington. So.
Yeah, that's why I got re-energized and became part of this again, was I don't want what happened in 2016 to happen again.
Oh, it just can't. I know.
And now our governorship is up for grabs, you know.
But what was that?
Now the governorship is up for grabs, and I very much don't want to see a governor that would just step aside and let Trump wreak havoc on us. As far as, especially the marijuana industry that has grown up here, you know, for him to just be able to shut it all down because somebody will lay down for him. I don't want to see that.
I don't think Jared Polis would do that. I mean, I'm pretty strong leaning toward Jared right now. I haven't ever had a chance to meet Terry Kennedy.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty strong leaning toward Jared, and I think he is very much with the Progressive Party.
Who are you looking at for Attorney General?
Well, I met, let me think of his name the other night. Oh my gosh.
It's either Phil or Joe.
Oh, yeah, Phil Weiser. Is that Phil Weiser and
Yes.
Joe Neguse?
Joe
Oh
Salazar?
my gosh. Oh, Joe Salazar. Yeah, Joe Neguse is a different seat. Well, I've heard, I haven't heard from Joe Salazar, but I have heard from Phil Weiser, and I decided to support him a little bit. I was really impressed with his energy, experience for such a young guy. He, of course, anybody's young to me these days, but I just felt like he had a lot on the ball.
I was going with Salazar because he's been at pretty much every rally down at the Civic Center Park that I've gone to be a part of. He's been speaking at every social issue that comes up. He's a featured speaker, you know,
Wow.
and he's always active, you know, in these issues. So
Well, and he's been around. He's been around a long time too.
yeah,
If I recall, I mean, I do believe he's been in this arena for quite some time.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear your opinion on that. I might have to take a good look at it.
All right. Well,
Anyway,
I'll look for you over at Jenna's table.
well, I'm actually not going to be there tomorrow. I'm just volunteering with all of this calling. One of these days, I'm going to make it down there and see what the process is, and I hope that somehow it works. It sounds like from what you're describing that it's not, the way it should be.
Well, I've seen some holes, and hopefully we'll fix them.
Yeah. Okay, and I hope you get a chance to talk to Jenna.
Okay.
Actually, I'll send her an email. Remind me, tell me your name again, since the screen has moved on.
Michael Clifton.
Christian, right? Yeah, I remember that name now. Yeah, I will send her an email right now and tell her to look for her.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Okay. If anyone else calls, by the way, that's a political caller, I am so going to stop what we're doing and just take the call.
Yeah, that's fine.
Complete transparency.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to comment on that bullet point. First of all, as far as teenagers and whatnot, we have to recognize, first of all, that high testosterone correlates with criminality. We also have to take into account things like, brain scans, all that other stuff. We also have to consider that a lot of prisons that call themselves rehabilitation centers do nothing of the sort. When I did my year and a half, I was in two different prisons. One is called reception, and you're there for 6 months before you get shipped off to wherever you're going to be for long term. Both of them called themselves rehabilitation. That they were not doing anything to rehabilitate anybody. The primary purpose of psychologists, counselors, etc. in prison, their primary goal is to get you to say that you understand the charges of why you're there. That's all they're after. There is virtually no rehabilitation. Also, for example, when I was in LA County, they had two different groups, and what they considered like the I don't want to say mentally ill because it was, but it that group consisted of mostly people who were like mentally ill or very low level offenders. What LA County did was pretty soon it started putting general population people into that group simply because it could say to the federal government, hey, look at all these people we have in this group. Now you need to give us more federal money. So again, the rehabilitation aspect of it really needs to be watched from that aspect of it. And again, unless we get genuine rehabilitation programs started and developed in prisons, nothing's going to change. I was also in the drug rehab uh, facility for about 4 months. What they considered rehabilitation was pretty much non existent. No philosophy, no self knowledge, none of that, just nothing but we want you to admit that you're a bad person and that you're a miserable shit and that you're broken. Basically, that's all it was. You might have had some where, okay, you need to pray to Jesus to fix you. Well, I mean, it's insane. There was no philosophy, no books on self knowledge, no books on ethics, no discussion of anything like that in either prison or rehab. So did this eliminate the ability of district attorneys, yada yada yada? I think that's just putting a band-aid on a much larger wound that's going to continue bleeding.
Okay, so next section in here is for community and victim support. And it says, provide a continuum of resources and services for victims of crimes, including notifications, shelter, counseling, and effective protection orders. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I vote yes.
Looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. Community policing. Number 1, ensure that all communities, regardless of race, ethnicity, or immigration status, receive a fair and equitable policing without fear of police interactions.
It's almost embarrassing that has to be a plank.
Yeah, but I agree with the sentiment behind it. I especially remember getting baseball cards from police officers when I was in like the 2nd grade. We would actually go up to police officers and try to get like it was like some initiative they had in Long Beach, California, where if you go up to a police officer and ask for his baseball cards, he had to go back into his trunk, open it up, and get you the special police baseball cards.
Huh. That's interesting.
And so they were just trying to get it to where kids felt safe going up to a police officer.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea in principle.
And each pack of baseball cards that the police officers had a stick of gum in it, just like regular baseball cards. So it was you were getting a little bit of candy too.
Yeah, but you could the argument that a lot of police would tell you that that would be an unsafe thing to do these days because the wrong person could find their name, address, etc., and blow their brains out. But also, in regards to the policies versus the
Well, this was just in their
perception,
cars. This wasn't in their houses.
you're always going to have certain groups, no matter how fair and ethical you are as a police force or as an individual cop, you're always going to have groups of people of certain, or you're always going to have people in certain groups. Sorry about that. People in certain groups thinking that they're being persecuted. You can have a cop following procedure 100%, it's 100% fair, but because Juan from El Salvador is an illegal immigrant, he's going to scream, I'm being targeted. I'm being targeted. Whether he is or not, we don't know. But even if he's not, that perception is still going to cause problems within the community. So a lot of it's also about educating people in different groups that, hey, these are the police procedures, these are what is supposed to happen. And, of course, body cameras are an excellent way that cops uh, can protect themselves and protect the populace, as well as people having, knowing that they can videotape the police. I think that's, transparency is a must.
I think to Mike's point, though, I think what the underlining principle behind behind the example was that law enforcement was trying to establish a friendly relationship with the youth, so they don't look at the police as scary, bad things, so if there is a situation later in life, they're not afraid to approach these officers, and I'm guessing that was the underlying principle.
Yeah.
I agree, but I also think that comes down to training for the police, as well as restructuring of certain law enforcement agencies. Because, like, for example, they 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 tend to hire nowadays. They tend to hire low IQ, and they tend to hire military veterans. So you might get some cop with like a 90 IQ who has PTSD, and he's looking at those kids on the playground like they're fucking Al Qaeda, and he's ready to blow them away. And that's another part of the problem. You know, officer friendly. Back in the 1950s, that's a wonderful idea, but we have to wonder, well, how practical is it? How can we, create the perfect cop for an imperfect society?
I think branching off of what Nick's saying there, I just watched the documentary on Netflix called Flint Town, and definitely the structure of the new police force in Flint, Michigan, is not conducive to what this plank is talking about, because basically they made a special SWAT team style police unit that is not integrated into the community at all. They're just there to chase down thugs in the highest crime areas, and they come in, they bash heads, they take who they want to take in, and then they leave. And they don't do anything like passing out baseball cards. They don't do anything like shaking hands and kissing babies. They're all about crackdown, 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 and they're not about connecting with the community.
I think that's worse. I think that brings it, that just really underlines one of the problems, and I think a lot of the problems people have with law enforcement in general is that climate of fear sort of approach to policing. I think that raises all kinds of issues.
I believe it's called the CAT team. It was like Crime Area Task Force or Tactical Task Force, and it was the new mayor in Flint, Michigan, after the whole water crisis, and they had a little political upheaval there. The new mayor appointed a new police chief, and that new police chief decided, we need to just be tough on crime. And they basically got a militarized vehicle, with it basically looks like the fucking Batmobile, and a Humvee had a kid.
And these are the ones that are doing the general policing in the area?
Yes. For that high crime area. Yes.
Yeah, that's I can't get on board with that. That sounds...
So I think I'm okay with this plank. Next one says, ensure that all law enforcement officers have proper training in de-escalation and use of non-lethal force whenever possible. I wholeheartedly agree with the de-escalation thing. I would say certain nights that I'm on the job, de-escalation is the number one thing that I do.
Yeah,
and when you see somebody who is escalating a situation versus de-escalating, you really value what de-escalation can do for the community.
Well, the part of the problem there is you've got police officers are incentivized to escalate the situation. And within these 4 bullet points, I'm not seeing anything about the community learning to police themselves or become politically active in how to properly challenge crime, challenge the government's response to crime, challenge laws, that kind of a thing.
Well, I think that some of the planks in other sections did kind of address that.
Okay.
You know, number 3 here says eliminate discriminatory practices in policing, including stop and frisk and racial profiling. We're talking about Colorado here, and we're a more progressive state. But I can tell you, having lived here since 2010 and been very close to a lot of political activism that looked like it was about to get out of hand, I have never been stop and frisked. And I've had large camera bags on me. You know?
Yeah, it seems like that would be
I don't have any friends that I know of that have been stop and frisked. And maybe I need to ask some of my friends that might have been racially profiled for this, but I don't know that stop and frisk is a very big problem in my state, especially in Denver. I feel like this is a problem of other states.
Yeah, it seems more like there's that would vary from state to state, and
I've never seen a stop and frisk ever happen, and I drive downtown all the time. I never see someone pulled over being frisked. You know, it's just not something very visible to me, and maybe it's because I'm a white guy, but I am downtown a lot. I just never see it.
Yeah, I generally don't like the idea of shakedowns, and like the more opportunities you create with these interactions, the more the likelihood of escalations. I mean, that's sort of my thinking going into that. So when you needlessly facilitate that kind of environment, you're opening the doors to these things. So let's say somebody's driving and they're pulled over, where they generally wouldn't have been a problem. There would have been no issue. Facilitating a situation where they feel they are being targeted, or for whatever reason, the risk of escalating a situation or creating a situation is a problem. So it kind of contradicts the initial, or the previous plank where it says de-escalation is important, or sorry, I should say it's consistent with the previous plank where if de-escalation is a principle, not facilitating needless situations where people are being frisked or searched, or those sort of situations would probably fall under that heading, if I'm reading it correctly.
I would say that because I've been in Denver, and I mean I liked it, but at the same time, what I noticed was, and I only saw like downtown area by the Capitol and whatnot, but what I noticed was it tended to be middle class to upper middle class whites, and the attitude is just kind of like pretty chill, right? Because you got money, you can smoke weed. It's pretty chill. Nobody's looking to cause trouble. But at the same time, I don't know what it's like to be, some black guy in the ghetto who lives in Denver. I don't know what his or her experience is. I don't. I know.
I would even go so far as to say, being a person of color in Denver, is nowhere near as inviting for police violence as being a homeless person in Denver. It's the
Oh, yeah.
homeless community that really gets dumped on here in Denver. And that's regardless of race.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, as just an ethic, if people aren't doing anything wrong, or if people
Yeah.
aren't,
Well,
leave them alone.
Being homeless in public, there's so many different things that are on the books that give the pretense of they're already in the wrong. So police can go up to them with, already having 2 or 3 things that they can immediately charge them with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Open container, camping in public spaces, all sorts of things. That they just walk right up and they're already guilty.
Yeah, they're like the targeted policy where they can basically just every quote unquote undesirable is already guilty of something, and it's just a matter, it's really comes down to the officer's discretion whether they want to enforce that or not. But it's kind of a guilty as charged.
Yeah, loitering, panhandling, all sorts of things that are on the books that they can be charged with.
I think a lot of it, though, is also societal scapegoating and the allowance of sadism against somebody, because the homeless are basically the most powerless people in the community, and yet anything can be done to them and nobody's really going to raise a stink about it. That's part of the problem. It kind of reminded me of LA, certain areas where, anything can be forgiven, just not being poor. So it's like, you can do anything you want, just don't be broke, because then, we're really going to come after you. So then I would look at how the society treats, and especially the police treat, homeless as a societal indicator of the degree of empathy or compassion or understanding that they have for people who are not like them. Because it can. I get it that it can be pretty terrifying for a yuppie to see some white guy or a black guy eating out of the garbage can, because something in the back of their mind, they've got to be thinking at some level, oh shit, if I lost my job, that could be me. So they want to chase that person off as a way of superstitiously exorcising that possibility out of their life, which is, it's just, magical thinking at its worst.
And it's compounded if they don't have, if there's no measures or no resources for homeless people to actually find a place to stay, or there's nothing available to them, so they're stuck with that situation, and they're kind of in that position where they can't get themselves, there's no means by which they can get out of that situation easily. So it's a situation where it kind of compounds on itself, and creating legislation that just targets things to make things even worse for people in that situation. I just don't think that's constructive for anybody involved.
Number 4 here says, provide a formal process to file complaint about officers and investigate all complaints with equal urgency with an unbiased third party. And I can say that the place that needs this the most is Denver proper. And Denver already has this.
Now, wouldn't you want, because what I'm reading there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it saying an internal investigation? But like, if you complain about a specific institution,
this is an external investigation with an unbiased third party.
Oh, sorry.
What they're saying is that the internal investigations, they have no confidence in them anymore. Yeah, because police have gotten off too many times, so they want a unbiased third party to look into it.
Yeah, sorry, no, I read that wrong. I conflated that with something else. No, I see. That was.
Denver has it, and I would say that the municipalities that need it next would be Colorado Springs, Pueblo, and Trinidad. and not even the surrounding areas around Denver so much. Maybe Aurora, but it really is the case that the homeless population start to get concentrated in the downtown area of Denver, and the suburbs around Denver don't have the same problems. You know, as far as needing this third party system. It really does seem to be maybe Aurora too, but mostly Denver.
Well, I'm more interested in what does an unbiased third party look like. Everybody has a bias. I mean, there's always an angle. I mean,
the vote in city council that created the third party. I filmed it 2 years ago and I put it on my YouTube channel. That was like a really big win that they created this agency and or this position within city government. It's a paid position, and I don't know that it's actually panned out as far as like what it actually looks like. You know, it's still kind of formative.
It sounds good in principle. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to leave it to an institution to be relied upon to investigate it itself without bias. I think that would be even worse. So I just think, as a matter of deduction, that's a more sensible policy, is to have a third party that comes in and investigates them. I think in principle it sounds good.
Okay.
Also, one of the problems is that you'll run into the problem of the police saying, okay, we need to be on our best behavior with this person or with that person, etc. But with this person over here, they're not affiliated with them, so treat them in any way you choose. So it turns into basically, eventually at some point, you're going to get the favoritism and the bias of the system, as if you didn't even have the unbiased third party, because really anybody can be. I mean, what most people are what's the word, opportunistic. So if Officer Joe pulls you over and says, I can. Oh, I see that you're part of the third party. I can let you off this traffic ticket today, right? I mean, you're gonna kind of say, yeah. I mean that shit exists in every layer of government. It exists in every interaction. That possibility.
Yeah,
So
you're always going to have a certain amount of that, I think, in any institution. I mean, every governing body is certainly susceptible to those sorts of things. I think it comes down to checks and balances and
which I think boils down to knowing police procedure to a certain degree. I mean, I recall, and I'll make this quick. I recall one time many years ago, I basically got pulled over by a cop, and I said, well, show me the law. And he was like, well, I don't have to show you the law. I said, yes, you do have to show me the law, because you guys carry the big green book of the codes in your car, in your trunk. Let's go get the book. Let's look for the exact code you want to write with the ticket over. He was kind of like, what? He didn't know that I knew about the book. We got the book. We looked through it. He wrote me the ticket anyway, but I considered it still a win, because it was like, okay, now at least I have the tools to where I can make an argument. Whereas most people, they're so clueless that they just, drop to their knees the minute the man with the badge shows up. And then afterwards they whine and bitch.
All right. So, criminal defense. Number one, we stand for is ensure access to quality defense counsel for all those accused of a crime.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Number two, end the practice of overcharging offenders to effect plea bargain.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely seen that happening, where charges get stacked upon a person, and we know from the get-go what the prosecutor actually wants to get them found guilty for, and all the other charges are just extraneous.
Yeah, they're basically creating an illusion that when they negotiate this thing, they're trading down on a lesser sentence when really that was the intended sentence to begin with, and they're just basically setting it up so that regardless of whatever negotiations or delegations proceed from that, they at least get the charge they want to hang on the person.
Yes.
Well, and part of the problem is every prosecutor wants a win, because eventually they want to move up in the ranks, and plus they want to punish anybody who's going to make them look stupid. So even if you're innocent and even if you go to trial, some prosecutors, I mean, they can really fuck with people. And also, I mean, personally, as far as criminal defense, I would put in something about educating people on jury nullification, because I think if people knew about that, a lot of these laws that they have on the books would be automatically scrapped, just by action of the people, in the process of jury nullification.
I've seen jury nullification work by people who were educated about it, and I've actually seen police officers harassing people who were passing out pamphlets about jury nullification at the courthouse to try to educate possible jurors. I've seen police officers instructed to move those people away from the courthouse, off of courthouse grounds. And I've definitely, every time I had to go to traffic court for anything, the whole practice of overcharging was something that I had to deal with, where just by appearing, I would be offered, okay, we'll mark it all down to this one little charge if you accept to take the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And I did feel kind of ripped off by the whole situation. Because if you try to fight it, then you are then up against all of the other trumped up charges.
Yeah, it's in a sense kind of like how YouTube behaves with what is it, after a certain amount of, like, after you file, or after somebody files a complaint against you, if you file a counter complaint, if you something after, I guess, however many exchanges, I think it's after the initial exchange, if it continues, if they've deemed that you're still in the wrong, you can lose your account, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which is really crappy, because some people really get screwed with that.
That's what happened to me with Sesame Street.
Yeah, you run the risk of just losing everything, and I think that's not a particularly good.
Well, it's like, powerful people don't like to look stupid. They don't like to look. They like, being petty works, and we have a society where the minute somebody admits that they're wrong about anything, they lose credibility. It's like somebody who changes their mind on a subject gets trashed worse than somebody who sticks to their guns and is completely wrong.
Number 3, restore rights for criminals to vote while in custody and return all constitutional rights when on parole. Because I've been I've had a voter registration drive in my own name before. I've had to take tests where I know that while you're in prison for a felony, you cannot vote in the state of Colorado. As soon as you're on parole, you can't vote until your parole is over, right? In the state of Kentucky, for example, as soon as you become a felon, you can never vote at all ever again.
Yeah,
So,
once there's certain convictions stick even after the parole
yeah.
procedures. Yeah.
So in our state, being a felon, you will never get gun rights ever again. But as soon as your parole time is over, you can vote again. If you try to vote while you're on parole, it's another criminal charge.
Which I find strange, because if you're deemed fit to live back within society and readjust and rebuild your life as a regular citizen, sort of moving on from that, it seems strange that you would suspend particular rights. I mean, it's almost like saying, yeah, you're good enough to be back out in the public, but you're not good enough to enjoy these particular rights again. I mean, there's I don't know. I think you can make a lot of noise and a lot of arguments for
Well,
that sort of stuff.
it makes sense, because that way the government has a societal scapegoat. If the government can sit there and say, well, there's this class called the felon class, and all you people who are non-felons, you're good, ethical people because you obey the law. You need to be afraid of those people over there, because even though we've let them out because they're rehabilitated, they might still do something. In regards to felons getting rights back, I'd like to see getting the Second Amendment rights back. I'd also like to see being allowed to run for political positions like city councilman, even legislator, all the way up to governor.
Yeah.
I guess I could see where during a parole period where somebody wouldn't be able to have access to their Second Amendment. I mean, I think there could be a good case as to why that would be a situation. Let's say somebody just gets out of jail. They really don't care if they go back. They just want to get whoever it is that put them in there. They acquire a gun, and then you've got those sort of situations. I don't know how common that would be, but I can see where an argument would be made that you would, at least during the parole period, suspend certain freedoms or access to certain things. I think you could make an argument for that.
But then you also have to look at nonviolent crime versus violent crime. I mean, if some guy's getting out after doing 25 to life for, murder, rape, and torture, obviously you do not want that person having a gun. Somebody who gets thrown in, a felony for, I don't know, like ownership of like 1 ounce of like a controlled substance, because they're a dumbass because they were a dumbass when they were 17 or something. I think, yeah, let them have their gun, let them eventually run for office, just leave them alone. They're not going to do anything, too horrible. That said, you can see that, there's politicians and etc. who have, never been to prison, and they're breaking all kinds of laws. So, yeah.
So when it comes to
Number 4 here says establish parameters for informed consent for offenders and victims, considering age, mental health, disability, and education. I agree with this in that I think that when someone's given their Miranda rights, and it's not in the field setting, if they're actually in a police station in a room where they're told, okay, now you're under arrest, I think they should have some forms put in front of them and have them initial, after every right that they have, that they understand the right.
Mm-hmm.
Break it down for them. Don't just, have people that are uninformed about their rights.
Yeah, you don't want the reading of the Miranda rights to be ceremonial, where they just sort of breeze through it, and it's like, and now that we've got that out of the way, now we start behaving unethically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Number 5 says comply with habeas corpus, meaning people within a reasonable amount of time, which in our state is like 1 to 3 days, you go from jail to your arraignment.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's normally within 24 hours, unless there's like holidays or like the weekend cycle starts. But normally, it's within 24 hours somebody gets arraigned for their crime, and the judge decides whether or not they should be held, you know, or released on bail or released on their own recognizance. Where I've seen this personally get a little bit sticky, in my opinion, is in the hospital setting. I've seen someone be brought in by police because they know that there is a specific amount of time that they will be held if they bring them in on suspicion of having taken a drug like PCP.
Right.
The doctor will put a hold on them and say, we're going to do an observation period on this person, and we're going to hold them in this emergency room. And if they're acting a little bit crazy or they try to resist in a way that I've sometimes felt would be to be expected, even though it's kind of irrational for the situation, some people will start to get really physical because they don't want to be held, right? And so they'll get strapped to a hospital gurney, and they will be held for maybe 8 hours, and then the police might take them away. Well, what happens in that 8 hours that is lost for that person? Sometimes it's a search of the person's property.
Right.
You know, and it's like the decision to bring them to the hospital. Sometimes I don't understand why they didn't just take them to jail, because sometimes it's a completely lucid person who might be a little bit drunk, might be a little bit high on a drug, but they still seem to me with it enough to not be put through the hospital routine first. And I know that there are many times where the police do skip the hospital portion and just make a judgment call and say, yeah, they don't really need to be checked out. We'll just take them to jail. You know,
Yeah,
so they pick and choose whether or not they go through that route. And it's because they want to create a window of opportunity for other things that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I've ever been in the position to be able to address, mostly because of the confidentiality aspect of me not being able to talk about a patient's situation.
Yeah, right.
So I can't really help them out in that respect, but I would hope that someday somebody defends themselves by bringing that whole window of time into a legal proceeding, and maybe some judge will make a ruling on that.
I guess does that also include? I know in the States you guys got a bail bonds industry as well. Does that also relate to that, where the person has a certain amount of time to make arrangements with or apply for specific assistances or things like bail bonds? Like, is it related to that in any way, or am I conflating two?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
If you're to comply with habeas corpus, if somebody's held and then arraigned, they should be given, if they're given bail, they should be given the opportunity to talk to bail bondsmen.
Right.
Which I've never seen that to be a problem. But I'm not in a criminal justice setting. But the bondsmen normally have offices that are right across from the courthouse in most any municipality. They love to be right across the street. So,
well, it's location, right?
Yeah. Under sentencing reform, it says abolish the death penalty in Colorado and federally. I personally am in favor of abolishing the death penalty, but I think that this is pretty straightforward. Whether you are or not, this is written well.
It's very clear. we've fallen upon one that is actually articulate and straight to the point. I like it. We can, I don't think there's any ambiguity there. That's pretty clear.
I've got my reasons, but we can move on.
Yeah, no, I generally don't have an issue with that.
Yeah. 2, support comprehensive sentencing reform, including ending mandatory sentences.
Well, that's
I like a lot of the mandatory sentences as far as like the sentencing guidelines that judges use. But I have seen individual cases where the mandatory sentences were not appropriate. So,
yes, especially if they're getting upsold to a greater charge. I guess my issue with that is you can make a case for why having a specific standard for certain crimes carries a penalty. Like you can consistently lay down a framework of if you do X crime comes with a mandatory penalty. So you end up with a system that's fair. So you don't have two people, in cell A and cell B, both guilty of the same charge, but doing different sentences, because let's say one person's family was a little wealthier, a little well-connected, so they went a little easier on the sentencing. Like, at least if there's a standard and we see that somebody's not being or being given favoritism or there's something's being lax, at least you have a platform to argue a case as to why there's inconsistencies and why there's injustices going on.
I disagree because, first of all, there's lots of court cases in which mandatory sentences, mandatory minimums do not apply because of position of the person being charged. Also,
you all right, Mike?
I just had a little problem with my potato chips.
Oh, okay. It sounded like you were going down a flight of stairs or something there.
No. Just had a problem with my potato chips.
Okay.
The problem was talking. I was breaking out the chips.
Okay. All right. No, continue.
Go ahead.
As you were.
I think as far as mandatory minimums and all that kind of thing, I think a lot of those mandatory minimums need to be struck down, especially in regards to non-violent crime. We really need to make a distinction within the legal system between those two things, violent versus non-violent. And partially, one of the things I would like to see in the educational system is students, there being a couple of classes focused on just basic common law, just basic law. Because most individuals, especially young people, are woefully ignorant of the court system, of the legal system, of how to even something as simple as paying a ticket. Most young people have no clue as to how they need to do that, or even challenge a parking ticket. So I think that's another thing that needs to be considered.
Well, just to reiterate what I was saying, I mean, we could discuss what these standards are. If the standards themselves are unreasonable, I'm just saying, in terms of applying a universal standard to certain, at least something we can at least have something that's consistent, that certain charges carry certain. Behind the example was that law enforcement was trying to establish a friendly relationship with the youth, so they don't look at the police as scary, bad things. And so if there is a situation later in life, they don't. I got an echo here. These officers. I'm guessing it was
Nick.
the underlying.
Yeah.
I agree, but I also think that comes
down. There you go.
Yeah, no, just to reiterate, I mean, I'm not saying that the standards that the standards are good. I'm just saying
certain law enforcement behavior. Because,
Um,
like, for example, they tend to hire nowadays.
I just muted him.
okay. And having a conversation with myself 5 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, just to reiterate, it was, I mean, I'm not saying that the standards that they have now are good or bad one way or the other. I'm just saying a universal standard where certain crimes carry certain punishments and there's a consistency with that. That was all I was saying with that.
Okay, so number 3, reserve prison beds for those who pose a true danger to society and seek alternative sentences for others.
I don't even know what that means. That's just so open-ended. Like, seek alternative sentences for others. Okay, what are the others? What are the alternative sentences? Like what?
Well, I think that an alternative sentence might be you give someone probation instead of prison.
So so it would depend on something like the severity of the crime.
Mm-hmm.
Serious offenders get a guaranteed night in the slammer. People caught on lesser infractions get a different arrangement. Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. It almost seems like that should be something that's already implicit in the system, would it not?
I think so, but there are some pipelines of, say, 3 strikes and you're out with drug charges.
Oh yeah, you guys still have the 3 strike system, eh?
We do have systems that approach that, you know.
Mm-hmm. I know that was something back in the 90s. They were doing more of that.
Yeah, federally we would have that here, but on the state level, not so much. But also, we have escalation built into certain crimes, such as DUI.
Mm-hmm.
On your 3rd DUI, you get a felony here, and you do prison time.
Right.
Where it's maybe something that could be treated with mandatory treatment, you know, in the community rather than putting that person in prison.
Right.
But when I read the words pose a true danger to society, if this person has had their 3rd DUI, they are endangering society.
Yeah.
You know, they're almost committing manslaughter every time they do it, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. For sure, yeah.
So there's a gray area there.
Mm-hmm.
Prison reform. So glad we have Nick Bravo with us for this part of it, the platform. Number 1, ensure safety of detained persons and provide access to rehabilitative programs. Anybody got a problem with that?
Nope, that sounds good to me.
Yeah. Eliminate for-profit institutions and programs.
Yeah, I'm for that too.
Yeah, you mentioned that on the last show.
Yeah,
that should be one of their top priorities, and there it is.
Yeah, no,
I kind of buried, but it's there.
Yeah, I really don't like the idea of setting an incentive, a profit incentive for incarcerating people. I think that just sets a horrendous precedent and just opens the doors to all kinds of problems.
What I also don't like as far as incentivizing though, this might be from like the right wing perspective of me, but I see if you're going to have a lot more community corrections where people are not going to jail or prison and they're on probation or parole or in some program, you're going to start a lot more jobs for social work and a lot more jobs for parole officers and probation officers, right? Well, that's going to get a lot of people that vote Democrat because their unions will vote Democrat, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so the Democrats are then incentivized to lean more towards community corrections versus putting someone in a for-profit prison. But even the community corrections programs themselves are kind of for profit in that many times the offender has to pay for their own therapies,
Right.
and they're forced to pay for every class that they go to. And if they can't pay, they get remanded to jail.
Right.
So that they're forced to go work to make the money to pay for the thing that they're sentenced to.
I think I don't see a problem with let's say rehabilitation centers want to compete in a market. Like there's different facilities after incarceration, like that sort of stuff. I have no problem with being part of the free market. Just the prison system itself as an institution, I think that's where I take issue with the idea of incentivizing that as a profitable institution. I just
sympathize with the person who's sentenced to go to, say, anger management classes and DUI classes and whatever variety of classes they're sentenced to take. And then every time that they show up for those classes, they have to pay between $15 and $50, and they're weekly. And, they have to deal with trying to start their life all over after getting out of prison, maybe. And so they don't have a lot of money. They're trying to scrape together enough to make a down payment on an apartment where they have to put up the deposit, right?
Right.
And all of these programs that we make them go through where they have to pay money through each stage of it, it just kind of cripples their ability to get back on their feet, which might lead them back to another criminal act.
Yeah, I think you can make a very good case for that.
I'm just sympathetic to how hard it is for them.
Yeah. No, it's not a simple thing, that's for sure. I mean, there's a lot of nuts and bolts in that one.
Yeah.
I think just the mood of that type of policy, the mood of a prison for profit system, I think is a discussion that's at the very least something to be looked at and explored a lot more and improved on. I think at the very least we can say there's definitely room for serious improvements as far as the current system.
I'd also like some transparency in finding out what judges, lawyers, prosecutors, police, etc. own stock in private prisons, because I think that could go a long way to shining some light on significant problems, because there's been significant stories about judges, sentencing juveniles to certain prisons, and it comes out later that judge had so many shares of stock in that private prison. So it's
or the judge's wife owned it.
Yeah, I mean it's horrific, and that kind of thing needs to basically people. The legal system needs to become a lot more transparent, because if you think about it, you can actually make correlations with the legal system to certain things like the Catholic Church. Because if you think about it, you've got the judge, you've got people in robes, you've got certain positions, you've got the high priest, you've got areas where you're not supposed to go. They're speaking a different language than the layman. It's all this like mystical, woo-woo mumbo jumbo bullshit that, if you look at it from, if you used the same trappings, somebody would easily say, "Oh, that's a cult," and then it's like, "Well, no, actually, I'm talking about, the courthouse next door." It'd be like, "Oh, okay, makes sense." So I think there needs to be a lot more transparency regarding the legal system as a whole, and it's got to start in schools.
I agree. 3, evaluate and hold accountable all youth and adult correctional programs. I'd like to think that was already happening, But so many stories get out of examples of how it's not happening.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing that some of these are actually platform planks and things that need redressing. I mean, they should be just. I mean, it almost should just be obvious that's a standard. I mean, especially in regards of accountability. I mean, that's
Number 4, significantly reduce solitary confinement and ban extreme sensory deprivation.
I don't know much about that. Is that something? Is that
we
an
have
ongoing thing?
supermax prisons here in Colorado where we take the most violent offenders from other states and house them here, and those other states pay us to do so. And what happens in a supermax prison is there's things called the hole, where they have solitary confinement, where they have very little space to move around. There's only one person in that cell. They would not be able to talk to other people in other cells because they're so isolated. And they are brought out for maybe an hour a day to walk around in sunlight. And we do have that for the most extreme violent criminals, but also there's plenty of documentaries that have been done on the criminals that are in them, where those guys basically read books all day, and they don't look very violent at all.
Yeah.
You know, but basically based on their charges, that it's just assumed that that person is so dangerous that they could not be out amongst the rest of the people, or maybe they had something happen while they were behind bars where they attacked someone, and they just get put in solitary confinement for the rest of their time behind bars, or significant portions of time. I've heard of people being in them for years.
Yeah, it's like a Hannibal Lecter sort of situation where you have these guys that are. I guess the question I would have is what kind of, because there has to be some sort of system within the prison that if somebody, let's say, continuously or even just attacks another prisoner, there has to be some kind of ramification within that system to address that. And I don't necessarily see taking that person out of that particular community, if you can call it a community, and putting them in an isolated situation. It seems to me like something has to be done anyway. So I it's hard to say with this one.
Yeah.
Yes, but you're assuming that the only people they put in solitary are the dangerous ones. That's actually not true. Anybody they deem as mentally ill, unable to defend themselves, special circumstances. When I was in prison, I met 2 transsexuals who they both had their private cell, and that was because general population would have killed them. So these people were, for the most part, in solitary confinement. They were nonviolent. The only thing is that the guards just didn't want to deal with them. The guards look for ways to do as little as possible. So if you can take somebody, you just don't want to deal with them. You just say, okay, they're dangerous, blah, blah, blah. You put them in solitary confinement. You just sit back and do whatever you want. Watch YouTube all day as a guard. Make sure the meals get to them or whatever. You don't have to do much at all, really. So it's like, but yeah, there are people who are nonviolent, who are suffering or are mentally ill, who are put into solitary confinement. And I can tell you from experience, even though I was around other people, when I got out into regular society, I still had issues with anxiety. I still, to this day, don't feel like I can have a normal conversation with a regular person because of having been in that situation, having experienced prison. I honestly don't feel like I can have a normal conversation with people. Imagine how much worse it is for somebody who's in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. They got book story. They might be very intelligent, But as far as social interaction, to just have a conversation, to get a job, to do anything, to negotiate, you've destroyed their ability to do that.
So this would also apply to the most vulnerable within prisons. There's people that have unique circumstances where it might be advantageous for them to be isolated from the rest of the inmates.
People who shouldn't even be in there, but they put them in solitary because they can't release them. But then if they put them with general population, they're going to get killed. What do you do with them?
Yeah, that seems... So I wouldn't necessarily jump the gun then on that and just vote a yes or no on that. That seems like something that needs a lot more explanation and more clarity.
As a side note, I think Michael is crumpling the potato chip bag, but he wants me to shut the fuck up. So
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Chip bag signals. Yeah.
Number 5, provide adequate treatment rather than incarceration for those with mental health issues.
Yeah, I think that would be nice to see.
I'm going to say yes.
Well, especially if we go back to the principle of rehabilitation. If there's no chance that the person would just rehabilitate in a general incarceration setting, it just makes no sense to even put them there for that purpose. It would seem to me that special circumstances require different methodology in terms of how you address their rehabilitation. Again, if we're operating under the principle that prison is for rehabilitation, I think that's an important antecedent in that.
Number 6, provide ongoing education of criminal justice personnel on dealing with specific issues of the offender. Seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, it almost seems too simple. It almost seems, but I mean, as it's written, it makes sense.
Marijuana and the war on drugs. Number 1, end the war on drugs. Focus on treatment, not criminalization.
Yes. Absolutely. They're
speaking to me.
Yes, this is speaking my language. Well, the war on drugs, it's such a loser. I'm kind of amazed this thing is still a discussion, frankly. I think the evidence and the history of it really do speak for it. It speaks for itself.
The government doesn't care what drugs you take as long as they're the ones supplying them.
Well, as long as they're getting the right tax on top of it. As long as they're making the right kickbacks, I guess, right?
Well, if you look at what they're doing in Ohio, what you've got corporations doing is they're trying to get legislation written so that monopolizes the legal pot industry when it starts up. So that Walmart or whatever the fuck corporation, they want to be able to sell to people and regulate like alcohol, but they don't want the average person to be able to grow fucking 2 plants for themselves. So yeah, it's all about them creating profit for themselves. It's about monopolizing the market.
All right. Number 2, amend banking laws to allow cannabis-related financial transactions. This is something that we cannot do. Like, we can make a state law about it, but still no bank is going to go against the federal law. So what this needs to be is be in favor of amending federal banking laws. These banks don't just operate within the borders of Colorado. If a bank takes money from a cannabis-related business, they're going to get cracked down on by the federal government. And so it being a federal problem, we need to just be in favor of changing federal law. And this does not go far enough. But I'll also say that the situation that we have where cannabis businesses were taking in millions of dollars and could not use banks actually fueled a lot of cryptocurrency innovations.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that.
I'm not saying that that was a necessarily a good thing to have it be necessary, but it was good for the cryptocurrency situation for a while.
Yeah.
I don't think that they should be forced into that position, but it definitely did benefit the cryptos.
Yeah. Well, the market hates a vacuum, right?
Okay. Number 3, remove classification of cannabis as a Schedule 1 substance. Again, not something that the state government can do. Scheduling of substances. Actually, there is a state schedule versus a federal schedule, but they need to affect the federal schedule for things to change in our state.
I'd actually go one further. I'd like to see legalization of shrooms and psychedelics like peyote, ayahuasca, other natural plant medicines, you can call them. Because I think there's, you know, clearly something like peyote is not as harmful as, say, meth, and they're both very different, used for very different purposes.
Well, I don't think that just the fact that it's a natural growing thing should be the guideline that we use as far as legalizing something, because hemlock is a plant, and there are dangerous poisonous plants that we should not be using that might get you high before you die. But I would agree with pot and perhaps certain psychedelics that they should be at least considered far less harmful.
Yeah. I think we should go back to using like hemp paper, like, because hemp, you grow an acre of hemp, you can make a lot of paper, and you can, the issue with the paper industry. I mean, DuPont basically ran a propaganda campaign against hemp, so they, and then paid off legislators to make it illegal. But if you used hemp paper instead of wood pulp paper, you'd save a lot of trees, and it'd be a heck of a lot better for the environment. And I'm not even sure if people are actually starting to think about that, because the cannabis itself is so profitable, but at the same time, it's like hemp really would save the environment.
In my general position with drugs and just in general is I'm very libertarian in terms of I just think people should be able to do what they want as long as they're not harming other people and they're making their own decisions. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean I rubber stamp it and say I approve of that behavior or I do it myself. I'm just, in terms of legislation, I'm for people just being able to make their own decisions and do what they want. That so. Any of these sorts of like state regulation things and on that issue, it doesn't speak to me in terms of policy.
Number 4, protect rights of cannabis patients, lawyers, and other professionals who consult with cannabis-related businesses. Okay.
Yeah, I think it just has to follow from the others, really.
Number 5, prohibit drug testing unless there has been a probable cause of a crime. Specifically prohibit use for state and federal benefits.
So let's say you have somebody that works for the public. Let's say, I don't know what it's like in Colorado. Here in Toronto, we have a public transit system, and that's handled by municipal and provincial government initiatives. And they, from what I understand, they have expectations to do urine tests and stuff on a certain frequency. I'm not sure what it is, but to make sure that they're not using while they're driving or while they're impaired. So would that affect something along those lines? Like, is this? I don't really. It's hard to get a vision of the scope of what this is, how much this is covering.
Yeah. I know specifically what they're trying to defend against is people being on welfare and food stamps being drug tested and then kicked out of the program if they come up hot.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And as far as I'm concerned, I think that drug testing should be something that gets done if people are on federal programs, but I don't think that it should be used as the criteria for removing them from the program. I think it should be used as the criteria for referring them to treatment.
Yeah, and it would seem more like
And if they're going to do a drug test, they should also do a breathalyzing. And if they can't get it legalized to where they treat being on drugs the same as being on alcohol, then that would be a very good litmus test of their intentions. If they can't beat the alcohol lobby to make it legal, but they can do it to illicit drugs, that's not saying much. If they're only testing for drugs and not alcohol, what's more destructive in most of the people who are on social services lives, drugs or alcohol?
right.
95% of the time it's alcohol.
Yeah.
So if they can't get these things to stick against alcohol, then why bother with drugs? The drugs thing is like a slam dunk. If you want to test for drugs and you find out, oh, this person used meth in the past week, all of a sudden they're demonized. But then they drink alcohol, they show up for an appointment and their blood alcohol level is very high. They're not demonized.
Right.
Even though alcohol is far more destructive drug than any of the other drugs put together, all of them put together.
So let me just spitball something out here, and you tell me what you think, because I think this would touch on your expertise as well. Let's say let's paint two situations here. Let's say you have a person that lives by themselves that is on food stamps and collecting welfare, and they make the choice, instead of buying X amount of groceries this week, they take that money and spend it for cannabis consumption or whatever the case is. Like they just change how they've taken whatever they've acquired in terms of financial means, and they've converted it to that sort of economy. And say, okay, maybe that person is a different situation than, say, let's say you have a single parent that is looking after a family, and they're choosing to use or to buy drugs or alcohol over, say, groceries, and that affects the kids and it affects other people within that family, where it's not just the individual, but these decisions have a carryout effect on other people around. Would that be a distinction in there?
I don't think there should be, in that the system itself is set up to where it makes it very hard for them to commit that sort of fraud, where they're supposed to be buying food with their EBT money. The card is a special type of credit card where it will only work for food purchases.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not too sure how that works out there.
So if somebody goes to the store and buys a whole bunch of steaks for their drug dealer, and then gives those steaks to the drug dealer,
right,
in order to buy drugs in lieu of cash, there's already a fraud that's gone on where they've tried to circumvent the whole process that we put in place to make sure that they're buying food.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it should be treated any differently than if they were going to their loan shark to pay off their loan shark, or they were gambling with the money, or they were trading their food for video games.
Right.
Other than, I believe they should be given referrals to treatment. But the crime that has been committed is they were defrauding the government, because the purpose of the program is to buy food, not to buy anything else.
Right, right.
So on top of just being punished for using their food money for non-food purposes, I would give them a referral to treatment. and say maybe mandate their treatment. But I would not put a special writer on like they need extra time because it was for drug purposes.
Okay, that follows.
That's not going to help them at all.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But I feel like the way that this is written specifically prohibit for use drug testing for state and federal benefits. I think this is just to preemptively block a Republican initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to be considered at all because the Republicans want it. We need to make sure that they don't get it. And we have, I feel, a good opportunity if we're already meeting people with giving them benefits such as housing and food benefits and whatnot. We can inject into their lives social workers that maybe should have the right to drug test them if they have a suspicion that they need it, and then give them a referral to treatment. I'm not saying that this should be at all criminalized. I say that to be part of the program, you should, expect this social worker is going to take a good look at the decisions you've been making in your life.
So you're generally against the grammar of this particular plank?
I think we should revisit it, but I just feel like we're missing out on an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think so.
I don't feel that strongly about this plank one way or the other. The opportunity could be had in other places, and I feel like this is more just an anti-Republican plank than an actual well thought out plank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Number 6, plant limits be consistent with voter intent for both medical and recreational users of marijuana. I don't really know that I'm in favor of plant limits, to be honest. I don't really want my policemen going to people's houses and counting 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 7 plants. You just broken a law. To me, if you have a law where you can only have 3 mature pot plants and 3 baby pot plants, that's what we have right now, unless you have a doctor's note saying that you get more. It's just retarded. I think what should be criminalized is the black market sale of the product. If someone's not licensed to sell it, then, and if they do, then crack down on them. But I don't have any problem with somebody creating an entire pot farm in their backyard. As many plants as they want. I really don't care about that. It's selling to minors, selling without a license, that kind of stuff is what I have more of a problem with, because there are products that could be made with more plants, like the Phoenix Tears sort of wax that people want to use to have treatments for severe forms of cancer and whatnot. They require plant counts that are just enormous to to winnow down into the concentrated product that they're trying to create. You need fields of pot.
And I think that's why they said intent. I think they made that distinction. Now, if somebody is just recreationally using it and they have hundreds of plants, like at least enough that you can say this is not just a personal use thing, this is a distribution and traffic issue, then maybe there's more discussion to be had with that. I mean, personally speaking, I'm just trying to frame this in context here. I mean, personally speaking, I'm with you. I don't care how many plants people have. I mean, I do have a caveat to that, though. I would like the plant limits to remain where they are in the city. And it's just because if somebody decided to create an entire
pot garden in their backyard in their neighborhood, that entire neighborhood is going to smell like skunk.
And put the people that are living there at risk of burglaries and put them in danger of people that want to come in and acquire the hard-earned crop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see where that's definitely a discussion to be had, for sure.
But I've driven down certain streets where, like, I know that on certain intersections you're going to get this waft of pot because there's a pot grow inside the, like, an abandoned factory that got turned into a pot grow center, and they're supposed to filter their air so that that doesn't happen. But there are certain intersections here in Denver that you just know as you're pulling up, oh man, here comes the skunk.
Yeah.
You know, and if your neighbor was doing that to you, you'd be pretty pissed off all the time. If your neighbor's house smelled like skunk and it was wafting over you.
Well, that's an interesting point, because that brings up property values and where things that would affect other people. So yeah, I think you can make a good case for that, for sure.
And I also think it's interesting that I'm more concerned about the smell than I am like the actual criminality of it.
Well, it's an issue. I mean, that is something to take into consideration. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that. So I think that certainly seems like a tangible.
Number 7 is expunge records for those arrested before legalization and release those now incarcerated for acts that are now legal. Although I'm going to agree with this, whereas it concerns pot, this is actually not something that any other kind of charge has any sort of push about.
Mm-hmm.
If we legalize something that used to be illegal, but you did it before it was legal, and it was illegal when you did it, normally you're still considered a criminal. You still committed the act while it was illegal. One very close parallel to this would be, for a good number of years in American history, absinthe was illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ordered some absinthe from a country where it was legal and had it imported to your house, you know, through the mail, and it was caught by customs, you would be charged with a felony federal crime, right? Now absinthe is legal. We actually have absinthe brewers. One such company is owned by Marilyn Manson. It's called Manson, right? We have a couple importers that now import it legally, but anyone who did it while it was illegal, they still committed a crime, and there's no public outcry about, oh, we need to lift their criminal charges and expunge them.
Right.
You know,
So
it's only pot.
Yeah, it's not uniformly applied. Yeah, that one seems strange to me.
We don't when we have laws about making something illegal, we don't go back to the people who had a record for having done something and maybe got charged with a lesser crime, and they say, oh, well, now the crime carries a heavier penalty, so now we're going to add that penalty to you. We don't do the opposite.
Right.
But we're going to go the other way.
Yeah.
Now, just the reason why I'm in favor of this is a very libertarian thing, but I don't want to pay to keep anyone in jail for pot. Fuck it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
My tax dollars should not be used to keep anyone in jail for pot.
Yeah, I'm. That's definitely where my thinking is as well. I just think
Like,
that's.
If they took those same tax dollars and made some treatment, I might be a little bit happier. But to keep them in jail, it's just fucking useless.
Yeah.
They get 3 hots in a cot for smoking some pot? No.
Yeah.
I want to point out this one thing. Sorry to interrupt. The arguments you're gonna get from the other side is that they broke the law. It's a safety issue, which is bullshit, obviously. But the reality of it is if when you go to these private prisons and these prisons who are holding these people, you got to understand that these prisons see those people as products. They see them as products. They see them as inventory. They're getting a certain number of dollars per year to house those people, etc., which pays for the paychecks, bonuses, pensions of the security guards, the prison administrators, etc. So you have to realize that these people are not seen as human beings. These people are seen as products. So that's what, anytime you're talking about the war on drugs or private prisons or the war on anything, you're talking about people as commodities.
I definitely think that that's another aspect of why I would want to stop paying for people who were arrested for pot charges to be in prison. It would be because we would then half our prison population, and we would move most of our prisoners to the state-run facilities and not have enough prisoners left for the private ones that handle the overflow. And I'm definitely looking at it as, well, that's a step in the right direction towards not having private for-pay prisons.
Yep, I'm okay with that. That works for me too.
If we have such an overflow from our state facilities because of pot charges, then let's just excise that one thing that makes it that we can't handle the population ourselves and have to go to for-pay prisons.
Yep. Yeah, sounds good to me.
Good strategy, in my opinion.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. I think, and it's just a bad, as far as I'm concerned, it's a bad investment for the public to begin with. This keeping people in prison for pot use. I think that's money that could be spent on much more important things, just right out of the gate. Even from the financial argument, I think it's, I think it's. Well, I think it's harder to make the case for keeping it than it is for getting rid of it, at least as far as I can see, in my opinion.
So next we have firearms and gun safety. And we've got, we agree with individual ownership of firearms for hunting and personal safety, but also believe that firearms should be regulated as follows. Number 1 says ban assault weapons, bump stocks, and high capacity magazines. What do you think about that, Proctor?
I don't like any of these. As a Second Amendment guy, I guess if I was American, I don't like any of them. But I'm not looking at it necessarily from that context. I'm looking at from a democratic context and how that squares with other things. So I'm trying to frame it a little bit differently than as I would normally go with it. I think there's some regulations that are like things like bump stocks and stuff. I don't have an issue with getting rid of it, but the whole assault rifles thing or the assault weapons thing, I mean, that's a can of worms. That's a can of worms. Because again,
so,
it's
high capacity magazines in the state of Colorado we've already banned.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, like it seems like the categorization of assault weapon keeps changing. Because didn't you guys make it? I mean, classically, an assault weapon was a fully automatic weapon, from what I understand. If I'm right about that, so that's fully automatic rifles. And didn't they already ban that in the 80s? Like, isn't that something that's been, sort of done and dusted for 30 some odd years now?
Well, now it's basically you can have the same weapon and take away some plastic parts and the grips and whatnot, the same caliber of weapon, and people don't look at it the same. It's the ones that look scary.
Right.
Anything that is black with black plastic on it is an assault weapon now.
Yeah.
If it has aftermarket parts on it that make it look scary, it's an assault weapon.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing that I'm always skeptical about is the never-ending creep of what classifies as an assault weapon. So the language of that to me, right off the bat, is just incremental redefining. So as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the bump stocks, you can make a case for it. I mean, there's other ways around that. Anybody that's proficient with a firearm or that is knowledgeable about them know that you can hook it around your belt loop and create the same effect. I mean, there's any number of ways you can simulate that same, you could replicate that same effect. So it's almost ceremonial to ban these specific things when there's just other ways around it. So, I mean, the bump stock thing.
Number one thing about this line is, for me, I know that we've already banned high capacity magazines in my state.
Yeah.
That ban is already in place.
Well, I think what happens there is the number changes. Before it was X amount of cartridges. Now they're trying to half it and then half it again. I mean, here in Canada, I think the limitation, if I'm not mistaken, is a 3. I think it's 3 rounds. I think that's essentially what you're limited to here. And that's probably what they're ultimately trying to go to. So here's anything that exceeds 3 rounds or a 3-round capacity would be considered a high capacity weapon. So that definition is another one that is always going to be in flux. And I think that I just don't agree with starting that precedent personally. I think that's
okay. A couple of things that I want to point out just for his sake of pointing them out is, number one, back in the 50s, even in the 60s, we had gun clubs in schools. Your average teenager was well acquainted with a rifle, with a hunting rifle, etc. Now, what we're doing now is, number one, people are woefully uneducated about firearms, and that's a lot of that's a cultural issue. Also, what you do by restricting things is you make them taboo to the younger generation. The younger generation thinks, ooh, we want to get this, because the older generation says it's a bad thing, it's a no-no. I think a lot of the issue is it's a lack of education. Because if you look at for example, if you look at all the school shooters, what was the problem? Not the gun. It was the fact that they were on psychotropic drugs. It's the fact that they were going through emotional issues, did not have the family support, did not have the community support. In the case of the Parkland shooter, you can see this on Stefan Molyneux's videos and other people's videos. The FBI was informed about this individual, and his family was visited over 20 times, and they did nothing. So it's not just the gun. You look at a place like China. China has massive knife attacks. There are people who will take a knife in China and go murder 20 people. They do it. It's possible. It's not a rare occurrence. The reality of it is the gun is just a tool, and the shooting, the action of murder or a massacre, is the symptom of a larger problem, which has more to do with the psychotropic drugs, the mental illness, the societal breakdown than anything else. So I think that, Second Amendment all the way, baby. If you want a fucking tank, buy a tank. If you can maintain it, great. But that's the reality of it. I mean, obviously, people are not going to be able to purchase heavy-duty weaponry. But, the Second Amendment was specifically for the purpose of, if your government decided that it was going to have a tyranny, or another country was going to invade your country, you would be going to be able to fight back. I also find it ironic, and this will be my last comment because I know the potato chip bag is at the ready. It's odd that leftists call Trump Hitler, but then they scream, "Take our guns, take our guns." It's hilarious.
Well, just as a sort of aside, just for I guess a context of where I'm coming from, because I come from a different time, of course, a time when people had porn magazines and other antiquated things. I used to be an Army cadet, and we used to frequently do target practice and handle rifles and stuff that was part of our regular regiment. And do you know where the firing range was?
Behind the school.
Under the
Behind
school.
The
school. It was in the school basement. We used to have rifles all the time. It was a non-issue. There was never a shooting. There was something, and this is where I have a certain level of disconnect, because when I think back to my upbringing and the environment that I grew up in, it's so different than the sort of behavioral things we see now. There's been such a radical change, and what I'm curious is what was that change? What solicited this real about face that we've done, and why is this the case? I mean, it's like saying it's the rifles to me seems like it's kind of ducking the issue, like it's avoiding the main reasoning.
So
I would argue that there is a correlation between gun hysteria and the number of psychotropic drug use, because the thing of it is, I mean, nowadays you see a commercial, every other commercial you're watching is a drug commercial. And if you want to blame a societal problem, you blame it on the guns, because if you blame it on the pills, that destroys a lot of profits for a lot of people, because that's the reality of it. You're always going to get businesses competing with each other. The drug companies want to say, we're the solution to your problems. The gun culture, the gun companies will say, we're the solution to your problem. But the culture that pushes psychopharmaceuticals onto people is a very different culture and a very different group of people making money than the culture that says, oh yeah, take your rifle to target practice after school, which target practice is in the basement, and it's taught by the woodshop teacher, Mr. So and so. Oh yeah, go bring all your guns, all your bullets, whatever. They're very different cultures, and they're definitely going to be competing with each other. So, and I'm sure Michael would agree to a certain an extent that he sees probably a lot of people who are addicted, severely addicted to pharmaceutical drugs that are perfectly legal with a prescription.
Mhm.
Yep.
My feelings on this first line. First of all, high capacity magazines are already banned, and most of the people voting on this tomorrow morning don't even know that. Bump stocks to me are such a small issue. Like, who the fuck owns a bump stock?
Yeah.
Like, it's such a rare thing in the gun world to even
Most
see
people
one.
don't know how to use it. Yeah.
And they actually suck. They don't really work right. There's so many other workarounds that would work. Bump stocks are just like the sensationalized thing of today, right?
Yeah, and I mean,
when it says ban assault weapons, here's my feelings on that. I've just read ahead with all the other parts of the firearms and gun safety platform. Nothing is really attacking handguns, which kill most of the people in my state.
Right.
And everything's attacking assault weapons. Well, if you're okay with black people killing each other downtown in Denver one by one with handguns, but you're appalled at one shooting where 11 white people died in a theater, you're a special kind of racist. You're an ignorant racist. You don't even realize how racist you are, because especially in places like Chicago, there are thousands of people dying every year to handgun violence. And are these people walking around with AKs? No, they're not, because they're wanting a concealable weapon.
Yeah,
All of their weapons are concealable.
Yeah.
and a lot of them
For
are.
me, to be only against assault weapons is the Democrats will attack the weapon of choice of white people because they can get away with it, but they're not going to attack the weapon of choice of black people because they're that afraid of being called racist that they will inadvertently become the racists themselves and become okay with black people dying in the streets one by handguns.
Yep.
Yeah, and the thing of it is if you got rid of, I saw a statistic on Facebook, and I forget the source, but if you look at America's gun death, compared to other countries in the world, if you took out the most violent cities like Chicago, Detroit, others, America would then, the United States would drop to one of the lowest. Also consider, it's a cultural issue. It's a values issue. If you're in a culture that values life, if African Americans valued themselves and each other, they wouldn't be murdering each other. But also, this also opens up to the abortion debate, because most children aborted are black children. If they, it's an ethics issue. It's a values issue. If you value another human being within your tribe to a high extent, you're going to choose that tribe member over everything else. Fuck environment, fuck ideology, fuck everything else. That's one of you. That's one of your own. That's your brother and sister by color, by blood, by fucking life. And you're going to do everything you can to promote their life, and they're going to do everything they can to promote yours. It's tribalism. And yes, that has its drawbacks as well. But you got to remember, the only way you're going to survive as a community is if you're somewhat tribalistic. And if not, then it's man against man, and then you cannot have a civilization. If everybody is looking to hurt or fuck over everyone else, you can't have a civilization. You have to have a specific set of values that you hold on to in order to have that civilization. That's reality. African Americans could have an incredible civilization if they would stop being opportunistic, if they would stop murdering each other.
So, number 2 here, enact universal background checks federally.
Don't they already have those?
I'm not sure. I haven't bought a firearm in a very, very long time.
This is a federal issue as well.
This is a federal issue. But number 3, enact restrictions. Must be 21 and demonstrate competency with firearms to purchase a firearm.
I think they already have.
There are different laws in different places as far as the age to buy a firearm. But but what I'll say there is there's actually part of the Constitution that would be against having a test to be able to buy a firearm. The whole shall not be infringed part. It's the same thing with you can't test someone as far as their knowledge for their ability to vote. It's their civil right to vote. Well, it's your civil right to have a firearm. You can't test someone and then take away their civil rights because they didn't pass the test.
Exactly, and that's a precedent. That's a precedent you don't want to set.
Yeah.
You have an 18-year-old who goes to the army, right? He goes to war. He signs the draft. He gets sent off to wherever the fuck, right? He's shooting his AK-47. He's shooting his fucking machine gun. He's 18. He comes back when he's 20 or even 19. And now because he's on U.S. soil, he's told, even though because he was in the military firing all kinds of shit, you're telling him that he can't even have a fucking handgun or a shooting rifle, that's a problem. I mean, if you're old enough to die for your country, you should be old enough to do whatever the fuck else, you know. That's just in my book, you know. It's a question of consistency. If you're allowed to fire a tank in the military when you're fucking 18, you ought to be able to fucking be allowed to shoot a handgun.
Well, in the
I'll agree with you in principle, but I'd say that perhaps we should not have recruiters targeting children.
yeah. Well, to go back to your initial point before, Mike, and I think this was a really important point, is this is a right issue, and you wouldn't, when you start to square this up with other rights, like would you have a test to vote for, to evaluate competency for the right to vote? Would you would you have a competency test for the right to speak or to express yourself? I mean, if you square that with other rights, it just seems, I mean, if they want to take that away as a right altogether, that's a different discussion. But in terms of how the current context and how things are framed, to put these limitations on things, on inalienable rights, this is a precedent I don't think should be set. This is a dangerous precedent.
I definitely think if they do something like this, they should be clear in their legislation that they don't mean to tread on things like voting. That this is a separate thing, because I do think that if you look at other things that can kill people, such as cars, we do have people take a test before they can drive a car, and we do make them get insurance for the damage that the car could do.
But driving is a privilege, not a right.
What? No. Driving is a fucking right. They turned it into a privilege because they had politicians and money people fuckers wanting to sell all kinds of shit and regulate it because they know there's a hell of a lot of money in regulating it. If you look at countries who do not regulate driving the way we regulate driving, there's less accidents, less costs. I'm sorry, it's a fucking trigger for me. It's a fucking SJW snowflake trigger for me when somebody sits there and fucking says driving is a privilege. No offense to you, but it is a God-given fucking right.
Well,
Proctor, thank you for triggering Nick.
keeping the discussion lively here.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's not to say that I'm not giving a qualitative value what I think of that. I'm saying categorically, is that not the case in the States, that it is categorized as a privilege and not a right? It is a distinction, right?
The distinction gets blurry. That's all I can tell you is the distinction does get blurry, because and I think the problem is it wasn't around when the Constitution was made and when it was easier to get amendments put into the Constitution, like the Bill of Rights, like the Second Amendment. Now, it takes worse than an act of Congress to get an amendment in, even when we do need to amend our Constitution, because there's things that we do need to amend, but people treat it as if it's now venerated, that all of the rights that we really needed are already there, whereas they don't touch on driving at all, because that wasn't something that was around back then.
Well, and I'll admit that if somebody is not competent to drive, then they should not be allowed to drive. But a lot of it is, I mean, rights are inherent, but at the same time, like, I have the right to shoot a 3-pointer during a basketball game, but do I have the ability? No, I do not. I have the right to do a lot of things, but do I have the ability? And I think that's a very important distinction that we need to make. Ability versus, right versus competence. I mean, obviously, if somebody is not competent to handle a handgun or any weapon, they should not be allowed to have one, obviously. But at the same time, other people, if they've shown that they're perfectly competent, then yeah, they have that right. They have the ability to manifest that right. Am I making sense? I mean, I don't want to lose anybody.
I heard you.
Yep. Just to make a small joke here, we could make the reference to officer, I was not driving, I was traveling. If anybody knows what that is in reference to, you'll appreciate what that's underlining.
Yeah.
So
and somewhere within that, we will refer to the Marine Admiralty laws as well.
So number 4 says prohibit the possession and purchase of firearms by people with violent criminal offenses or on a terrorist watch list.
Well, yeah, that kind of seems like a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. I mean, if you're on a terrorist watch list, then you know that
those
might
fucking sovereign citizens did that. They're bullshit.
Yeah, there's all kinds of funny in that. But in terms of what you're saying here, I mean, well, yesterday, as I said before, I have a lot of I have some issues with the lists and how easy it is to become a member of that prestigious membership on these lists. So to say that, well, somebody's a terrorist, we should, or suspected as a terrorist, it's like, okay, when you look at that language just as it's presented, you think, well, of course, it makes perfect sense. We wouldn't want them to have guns. But then when you square that with previous things we've discussed, just how easy it is to end up on that list, there is a relationship here. I mean, that statement doesn't exist in a vacuum, right?
No, it doesn't.
Number 5, except for security personnel, ban firearms on K through 12 schools, college campuses, and allow cultural institutions to ban firearms on their premises.
Does that mean security?
No, it says except for security personnel.
Oh, sorry. I was looking at something else. Except for, yeah, right in the first line. Sorry. I can't say I like the idea of, I mean, I know a lot of rhetoric has been going around about arming teachers and all this stuff. I don't like that as a solution either. I think there's good arguments as to why you don't want to facilitate that kind of ecosystem around kids. I mean, I can see the arguments for it both ways, and I don't necessarily. It's kind of depressing that we have that as a discussion. So I don't know where I stand on that. I mean, in terms of, as long as there's some type of security measure where there's some means of defense against an attacker there, I think that's something that has to be said. In terms of how they do that, I think that's a different discussion. So just banning firearms in really strict categorical ways, I'm not sure how I would approach that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what the solution to that. I don't know what the solution to that problem is, and I wouldn't want to put legislation before that inhibits certain possibilities to explore in other ways that deal with this issue. So I really don't know where to stand on that, to be honest with you. It seems, I mean, at least it's made that demarcation of except for security personnel. At least there's something in place there, but I don't know enough about the problem, and I don't know enough about possible solutions to just jump at legislating this sort of thing out of the gate. So
yeah,
I'm gray on that one.
I think if you're going to ban firearms on college campuses and large schools, you better have a large number of security people.
Yeah, there has to be.
When I think of traditionally the amount of security that were on any school that I've ever been to, I don't feel like that would be enough.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely something to be discussed. I don't know enough about the problem, to be honest. It's
Well, I would think that, I mean, within reason, because I mean, like for example, that what was it, Vermont Tech or Virginia Tech, um, somebody would have had a gun or a knife. They probably would have been able, in that classroom at the very least, they probably would have been able to take out that fucker who massacred all those people. But at the same time, it's like, um, it's one of those odd things. I mean, if everyone has a gun, then it's the great equalizer. But if it's only certain people, then it's a problem. Um, Definitely security. I mean, a college campus, I would say that security, but the regular students should not, simply because there's way too much room for error due to mental immaturity and emotional volatility. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult question, and I also think it depends on the culture and the city that they're in. Obviously, if you say guns are perfectly legal at Harvard, or some godforsaken hoity-toity ivory school, I think there's definitely going to be less crime than at some place like Community College of Birmingham. Um, so that's just a reality that we have to point out in regards to that question.
So, number 6 says enact extreme risk protection order law, which would allow families and law enforcement to seek a court order to temporarily disarm a person who is dangerous to themselves or others.
So that would be like if you have a spousal situation where they report that their husband has made threats of using a firearm and they happen to have firearms, that there could be an intervention that prevents that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't think I have a problem with that. I guess it depends how long they want to suspend those rights and what that actually entails.
Well, what that entails is you go back before a judge in the way that it works right now. The problem with number 6 is actually that it's redundant to the laws that we already have on the books. But the laws that we have on the books are not enacted enough, such as when you get a restraining order against someone, there is a box that the judge can check that's right there on the restraining order that can say you can't own a firearm for this amount of time. No judge ever checks that box.
Okay.
And I have a feeling it has to do with not wanting the law to be challenged as a civil rights violation, the state law versus federal law. And so we just underutilize the things that we already have enacted. So I'm okay with this, but I do feel like it's a little bit redundant to things that we already have in place. Like if someone's a legitimate danger to themselves or others, they should be on a mental health hold in an emergency room. The police, if they feel like they're a danger enough that they have to take their guns away, they should be taking them down to an emergency room for psychiatric evaluation. And if that's not happening, then I feel like we have a problem.
Yeah, makes sense.
But even though this is redundant, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, I largely don't have an issue with it. I mean, as long as the provisions are reasonable and they have there's an accountability to it and there's a set standard. Yeah, I mean, makes sense.
Number 7, enact criminal penalties when adults fail to properly store firearms and minors gain access and harm themselves or others.
Sure. I think owning a firearm comes with certain expectations and responsibilities, and I think that would be something that falls under that heading. Sure.
It adds basically a tax to owning firearms in that people have to have a safe that is, child-proof
Mhm.
if they're going to have children around their but there's other things to this. Like, what if the children steal the entire safe from your house? I mean, how far are you supposed to go as far as protecting your firearms if extraordinary lengths were taken to remove your firearms from you? If you don't have any children and children burglarize your house while you are on vacation and they get some firearms out of it, are you still responsible because that child who burglarized your house stole your firearms?
Yeah, and there's also, on top of that, there is another layer of issue where access to your own firearms. I mean, if they're locked up to such an extent that, let's say you have an intruder in your house and you have to have a reasonably quick access to these weapons, if it's just such an overly draconian laws where you have to lock these up, where you're actually defeating the purpose of having the weapons in the first place. Like, let's say that's the initial reason somebody buys a firearm is to defend themselves. If it has to be locked into some like 17 wall safe where you have to have eye scans, and like by the time you even get access to the weapon yourself, you're already screwed. I mean, it's kind of a self-defeating thing, but I think reasonable measures where the weapon's locked away, it's very difficult for kids to get access to it. I think there is a certain level of responsibility. Like, we don't want guns laying around. I mean, that's my general sentiment. Like, as long as there's a reasonable effort made there to make sure that's the case, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a responsibility that should accompany these things.
Number 8 is restrict firearms use in national forests to designated areas except during hunting season. Again, I'm going to call out the redundancy of this law if this were to put into law, because the National Forest Service does make gun-free zones or no hunting zones within national forests. It's just that most of the land is okay for firearms use, but there are certain parts that they restrict firearms use, especially high traffic tourist areas. So I think what they're actually wanting here is just more restricted areas.
Right. So does national forest in the States, is that a specific category? It's like a green belt sort of category, or like a conservation land?
It's like Yellowstone.
Sorry, I missed that. What was that?
It's like Yellowstone, where there are animals all over everywhere, and
so it's basically like your public parks and
our public giant parks.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'd be a great idea.
National forest parks could be the size of some states that we have on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Right. I think that you should have firearms, because I mean, the reality of it is, if you're hiking in some place like Yellowstone, there's wolves. Those wolves don't care about hunting season. If they sniff you out and they're hungry, they're gonna kill you. And that's bears or even a rabid fucking raccoon. You should have a firearm in order to defend yourself against wild animals. That's just reality, regardless of hunting season or not. Obviously,
it's restrict firearms use is what it's saying, which would be no open shooting.
Right, but that doesn't refer to carrying. Like you could be in possession of a firearm on these properties, but you can't just start opening fire at like Yellowstone with a bunch of kids hanging around and.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, that's common sense. That's good gun etiquette. That's fucking common sense. There shouldn't have to be a law for that. I'm talking more for if you're hiking or if you're with your family out camping, a bear wanders close to you, scare it off with a fucking gun.
Is that something that's an exemption in this? Because I don't know the underlying policy that this is in reference to. Like, is that something? Is there those kind of exemptions within that legislation?
I don't know.
Uncertain. Number 9, allow the CDC and other government agencies to conduct gun violence research and properly fund. And when I'm reading these, that being the last one, I'm okay with there being research conducted and us getting evidence to put into our evidence-based practices. But when I read that line and then I take into consideration the whole arming teachers thing, I'm thinking that this was written in the last month or two, and it was very inspired by headlines because the CDC not being able to do gun research because of lobbyists blocking the CDC from being able to specifically do research on gun violence. That's been a talking point in the news in the last 2 months.
Yeah, I don't see.
And I really feel like that and the teachers being armed thing are basically being preemptively attacked because they're probably going to be in the Republican platform. And this is another case of the Republicans are going to be against CDC research on gun violence, so we need to be for it.
Right.
And it's really headlines inspired.
So why is there an issue with just doing research on things? I mean, that's something that seems...
Well, if you can't do legislation if you don't have the facts to base your legislation on. And firearms manufacturers have lobbyists that the lobbyists will give campaigns money in order to assure that they will not allow the CDC to do gun violence research. It's like specifically in a lot of mandates that the CDC gets that they're not to be talking about gun violence.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. That's a mess.
It's just I'm in favor of knowledge. Let's have it.
Yeah. One
way or another, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that the truth matters, and studying these things and doing research on these things, I'm not comfortable with the idea of restricting that. That's extremely unobjective as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. We made it through that part.
One quick question though. Is with the CDC, is this secretly so that they can determine how many zombies can be killed after they're released onto the populace? I'm joking, obviously. Anyway.
Torture and the principles of the Geneva Conventions. We call on our local, state, and federal elected officials to work together to ensure compliance of the United States with all tenets of the Geneva Conventions, which has nothing to do with our state politics, but okay, let's go there. 1, prohibit the torture of prisoners of war, including enhanced interrogation techniques. I will go along with that because I've seen the evidence, with studies that says that torture does not produce any good intelligence that can be reliable. And so why do it? It's just sadism after that. Number 2 is prohibit extraordinary rendition. You guys know what that is?
I'm not familiar, no.
Let's say we took a prisoner of war from Al-Qaeda, and that person was also facing charges from France for a bombing. And we just give them to France without any sort of hearing as to whether or not they get to stay in U.S. custody to face charges with us, or get given over to the French government. We just give them.
Right, right.
That would be an extraordinary rendition if there was no hearing whatsoever and a prisoner was just transferred in between two countries without the prisoner being able to defend himself from the transfer.
Right, right.
I'm going to say, in principle, I'm for this. I don't know all of the ramifications that would happen because, probably there's some state secrets that might have a lot to do with why we do extraordinary renditions sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Where people just magically end up in the country where they were facing charges. But I do believe that we should not be extraditing people to the countries that they are facing charges in without them having to face a judge who makes a decision on that.
Right, right. Well, and the other thing too is you're dealing with other political systems and potentially corrupt ones that it seems like there's all kinds of problems with that.
I got a text message from Joe Salazar's campaign wanting to know if they can count on me for my support.
Okay. Well,
I didn't get a phone call, so I'm not going to stop the stream. Next thing. Insist that the United States observe due process in the apprehension, transport, and detention of any individual, regardless of country of origin. Yeah, I like due process.
Yep.
Number 4, close the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay immediately, review the status of each detainee held there, and determine the appropriate transfer of each detainee.
There it is. Gitmo. The Kim Kardashian of torture facilities.
I will say that I am in favor of Part 2 and Part 3. Reviewing each detainee's status and determining the appropriate transfer of them, I'm okay with. The closing of the military base itself, I'm not sure about that. I think that should be left to there's an entire committee for which bases should be opened and closed, and that's a congressional committee, and I would just leave it up to them.
Yeah, and it's
not like just because a bad thing happened there that it's not still a very strategic thing for us to have, and it could actually help us connect with Cuba. We could open a base like we have in other countries like South Korea or Germany, where it's a little bit more open to the the soldiers going out and being part of the population there. And we could actually get some I don't know how to put this, so something good come out of having a base there.
Yep.
I don't know what strategic loss we would have to not having that presence there.
And I don't know how this really squares up with Colorado State either. This seems more like a federal issue again that they're tapping into. It just doesn't. It seems inappropriate for this particular series of planks to be put in there in the first place. So yeah. That's
Number 5, investigate and consider closing the Western Hemisphere Institute of Security Cooperation, formerly the School of the Americas, based on its role in training Latin American and South American soldiers in questionable interrogation, detention, and warfare tactics.
I don't know enough about that to have an informed opinion on it.
I'm going to go ahead and admit that that's the first time I've ever heard of any of this.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, this is new to me.
I've heard about it, and it's basically it's associated with the CIA for the purpose of destabilizing South American and Central American countries. That's basically what it is. CIA.
Okay. To me, it seems like conspiracy theory talk, and it's in the middle of my platform planks.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's a little disturbing to me, but
It
I'll go ahead and say
honestly-
the investigate and consider closing part, just the first 4 words of that, I will go ahead and give my approval to, because there's no harm in investigating and considering.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would help if people knew what it was too.
Yeah.
You know, that's
I'm definitely going to do a Google search after the event is over tomorrow, because I don't have enough time to research this shit now, but I'm definitely going to research it later. You know, because it was a platform plank. It's done at least that much good.
Mhm. Yeah.
Number 6, cease the cooperation with nations that practice torture, abuse, illegal detention, and other human rights violations.
Where do you draw the line?
I think that that's already something that we do. When we find out that another country does something heinous, like gassing their own people, we start going, hey, Syria, let us investigate that thing that you just did.
Yeah, it seems redundant, because this is already something I think that falls under the Geneva Convention.
Well, that's why this whole section is labeled "Torture and the Principles of the Geneva Conventions."
Right. So they're just basically repeating things and saying, let's make sure that we stick to this. And it's like, okay, well, is there somebody that's is the other side advocating to increase cooperation with this? I just don't understand why this is here, if it's already a part of the Geneva Convention and nobody's.
We're just affirming that this is something that we care about.
Yeah. Well,
Okay. We're going to go through this next section, at least. It is the economy and social justice.
oh boy.
Strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen.
Sounds fine.
The wage gap between the top 1% and the remaining 99%
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
is greater than it has ever been. The middle class is shrinking, and the people living under the poverty level increasing. We must rethink our financial regulations, taxation, jobs programs, trade treaties, and priorities when spending taxpayer dollars. We also believe that a minimum wage that allows employers to keep employees in poverty and frequently require governmental assistance is unacceptable corporate welfare. Did I mention before that I felt like this was written by Occupy protesters?
You did mention that. That did not escape notice, Mike.
I feel like I just read an Occupy mantra. Yes.
Yeah.
But, great. They wanted to have representation in government, and here it is. Okay, economic policy. We support repealing of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and the Gallagher Amendment regarding property taxes. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights is something that I'm in favor of repealing. It basically says that anytime the government's going to spend money, we have to put it to a public vote. And what ends up happening is we never vote to spend more money, because it's always written in a way where we clearly can see what taxes will be raised for it and how it will affect our pocketbooks. And so since the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, the only spending that we've approved since then has been spending on education that comes directly from marijuana taxes. Everything else we've shut down because people don't like voting for raising their own taxes. So we have crumbling infrastructure because of it. And so I am totally in favor of repealing the Taxpayer Bill of Rights because of the way that it exploits the psychology of people in that they don't want to vote for spending their own money. You know what I'm saying? We elect people in this representative democracy to make these decisions for us, because sometimes if you just word it the right way, nothing will ever get done. And so I'm totally in favor of updating our government spending after it's been frozen for about 10 years. And so, yeah, totally in favor of that. I don't know what the Gallagher Amendment is. It's the first time I've heard of it.
I'm not familiar with it either. But yeah, I mean, the infrastructure doesn't build itself. I mean, nobody wants to pay taxes. I mean, I get it, but I mean, I'm not a high tax guy, but I'm not a no tax guy either. I mean, you do have to invest in infrastructure. I mean, bridges and roads don't take care of themselves. They don't. And sewage and other things. I mean, it's
apparently the Gallagher Amendment is just a set of guidelines for determining property value. And I think it might have been something where people's property tax got to the point where they couldn't afford to pay their own property tax, and they got their homes taken.
About the roads thing, though, I mean, small potholes you can fix yourself. You can buy the materials at Home Depot. There's a lot of stuff that people can do with roads and stuff like that, but they choose to have the government do it. But there's videos on YouTube of people repairing potholes themselves on public roads. So it's not out of the question.
With asphalt?
Yes, asphalt.
With their own asphalt?
With their own asphalt. You buy the shit, make the shit yourself. Yes.
It's awesome.
On YouTube.
Probably stinky, but awesome.
yeah.
Well, you know, I subscribe to the falling down theory of road construction. I think a lot of that shit is just so that they don't lose the money that they've already been allocated. And, you know, they got to keep their pensions and bonuses coming. So,
Okay.
way too much weight.
Number 2 is expanding economic opportunities by investing in public lands, buildings, and infrastructure. I'm in favor of it.
What does that mean exactly? What are they referring to?
I'd say one example would be if we have a bridge for one of our interstates that is the bottleneck, where we're having interstate commerce stopped at a certain time every day because it's stuck in traffic. We widen the lanes from 2 to 4 lanes.
Okay.
You know, and we make sure that bridge no longer is the bottleneck that creates the traffic jam.
So it's upgrading infrastructure, basically.
Yeah. Making tourist traps with public lands, you know, putting in things that make it easier to use public lands so that we get more tourism. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you're presenting it, I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah. 3, enforcing the Dodd-Frank law regarding the banking and investment industries. Okay. That's something that I feel like getting through the Occupy era of protesting, we all understand that. And so, number 4, separating commercial investment banking as per Glass-Steagall, repealed in 2007. Yeah, go back to Glass-Steagall. We had in 2008 a very big economic breakdown in our country because of the repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act. So,
yeah.
Number 5, demanding that banks that are too big to fail increase their cash reserve ratios so that they are not a threat to the economy. I would say I agree with that as a financial guideline, that we should put into law, but also if a bank is quote unquote too big to fail, I believe we should let it fail.
That's my position.
I do not believe that there is any too big to fail bank. And what we're doing is keeping smaller banks from being able to capitalize on the failures of large banks. And those smaller banks deserve a chance to become the large banks themselves and revamp the way things are done.
Right.
But yeah, we should have regulations about needing cash reserves ratios. Yes.
And securing bonds and
Yes.
stuff, and well, there definitely needs to be more accountability there. That is for sure.
Yeah. Eliminating public liability for speculative investment practices. Yes, definitely. 7, canceling government contracts with companies that violate the public trust. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
8, ending offshore tax shelters and tax evasion. Don't know how you're going to do it, but anything that we can do in that spirit, let's do it.
Yeah, because I mean, again, we're talking about international affairs here. It's starting to. It's the facade. It's kind of it's something that sounds nice and it's a phantom thing, but I mean, at that stage, what classifies as an offshore investment? Where are people going to be limited to invest internationally without it being categorized as an offshore investment? I mean, that's a can of worms in itself, that whole thing. And
yeah, I like the feeling behind it, but I just don't see how they're going to achieve it.
Yeah, I don't think it's realistic.
9, creating incentives to reward companies that bring back jobs to the United States and penalizing companies that send jobs offshore.
So that's strange. It's almost like they're arguing for a tariff-based market. It's very.
What's strange is if I look at that sentence and then try to determine without the context of knowing where it came from. If you were to ask me, is this in the Republican or Democratic platform?
It sounds more Republican.
Yes, it does. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Seems like we have some agreement that we need jobs. But like I said in the last show, we have jobs. We do have a lot of jobs. We in fact import people with the expertise to do some of our jobs that we should be educating our own people in order to do.
Yep.
If you look at say the Intel plant across town from here, how many of their engineers came from India and have special visas just to work there because they understand math? We have great jobs, and we need to retrain our own people in order to be able to do them, because technology will make any job obsolete.
Yep, sounds good to me.
Number 10, taxing all capital gains, qualified dividends, and carried in interest as ordinary income.
Yeah, I don't like that one.
I'll tell you what I do like. Any baby step in that direction. I think if we were to do that overnight, we would just completely crush our economy.
Well,
but let's say capital gains, let's just double it. If capital gains is at like 2%, let's put it at 4% and see what happens.
The issue I take with that sort of thing is, let's say you make an investment in property, right? Let's say you get in on the ground floor on a good property investment, and you buy it for the purpose of making an investment. I would rather people keep their own profits in that regard, as opposed to putting additional taxes on top of it, and let people manage their own wealth, as opposed to this sort of trickle down model where the government takes it and then redistributes it. And it's like, there's some things that I don't have a problem with people making profit and being able to realize those profits. and things like capital gains, we start to get into that territory where you punish people essentially for making profit. You know what I mean?
I do. But I feel like in our country, we have driven down the capital gains tax to such a low level versus all other types of tax. And we really have to start looking at what kind of a society we want to be. I'm a bit of a futurist when I say these things, but I believe things like universal health care is not something that is necessary for us to enact right now, but it is inevitable. And any straying away from marching towards it is only hurting us.
Yeah,
because we're getting to this stage where factories and corporations make products at such a streamlined rate that we don't need the manufacturing base anymore. We have people that will be out of a job that is in any sort of manufacturing of anything, right?
so
We're
what you're
going to have
saying,
3D printing of anything plastic in demand in your home in the future. We're going to have, Amazon delivering packages by drone. We're going to have all of these future technologies that are going to take away from our jobs to the point where, yes, we're going to have paying jobs, but they're not going to pay enough, and they're all going to be like just under the minimum amount of hours that are required for an employer to give you health insurance.
yeah, the full-time thing. Yeah, I guess it depends on if your property taxes, your general annual taxes are low, then implying or using that as a way to keep taxes lower while expanding infrastructure or things like healthcare or that sort of thing. The money's got to come from somewhere, and taking 4% on capital gains or something to buffer that investment. I guess is that the sort of nuts and bolts of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
I mean, it depends on what, I mean, again, it's just contingent on what is it you're looking to do, what kind of investments is the state looking to make, and what's the tax rate. I mean, if the tax is too low and you can't implement things that are going to be a net benefit to the public, then that's definitely a discussion to be had. Sure.
Number 11, reforming the corporate tax code to increase collections by setting a competitive international rate, which is fair and consistent domestically. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, but I'm going to admit that I don't know enough about economics.
Yeah, it's not my strong suit, so I'm
saying it looks like a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of things look good on paper.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Here I am, a delegate. I'm voting yes or no on this, right? And there's no way that I can be the subject matter expert of every one of these things.
Yeah,
and that one line, I'm like, seems like a good thing. It seems like some buzzwords that I've heard some of my fellow Democrats talk about. I don't know if I actually agree with it enough, because I need to take an entire undergrad degree in economics to understand what it's saying.
Or at least have a breakdown of what it's referring to specifically, so we can at least see what we're talking about here. Because it's, again, it's platitudey, where it's like, well, it sounds good, but what are we talking about?
Yeah.
So
welcome, Felinoid. We're into the economic policy portion of the show. His mic's muted, but we'll.
I turned my mic off because I'm making a lot of sound.
Okay. So, number 12, enacting a progressive estate tax and returning to a more progressive income tax.
Hey, Mike, I'm gonna bounce because there's a live stream about the Syrian bombing, and I'm getting kind of tired. So could you put the link to this in the description box for later when you finally get it posted?
I will do that.
Thanks. Take care.
All right, take care, Nick.
That's something that I forgot to do with this stream is take the link to being able to get this entire thing. I put it on the first one, but basically you'll now be able to, after I edit this, download this yourself.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm all about people being able to see things in transparency. Here I am creating a whole show showing that I'm actually reading this shit, whereas none of my other delegates are reading it. And even the people who are calling me from campaigns when I start talking about this stuff, they have no idea.
Yeah,
You know, I feel like a conspiracy theorist when I talk to this woman just in this show when she's calling to try to get support for Jenna Griswold. And I'm like, did you know this? And she's like, she's treating me like she has to be nice to me, you know, but she's probably in the back of her head saying, this guy's a nut job. He's actually reading.
Yeah, how crazy is that? We're going to vote on policy planks and we're going to on platform planks and people are actually reading them. Like, this is just unprecedented.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
How dare you be literate?
Yeah. Yeah. How dare you do due diligence, Mike?
Yeah. So number 12 is enacting a progressive estate tax and returning to a more progressive income tax. I'm going to say I'm in favor of it in that I actually think we should try to skew our tax rates so that everybody who is under, say, $50,000 a year pays nothing.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's, you read my mind. That's people below a certain income bracket just shouldn't be paying taxes. I think
if we can make it something that we take out of the pocketbooks of the people who don't feel it as much, let's do that.
Well, that's
instead of
sense.
And I'm saying instead of taking from the people that we're trying to help. Yes, there is this principle of what you put in, you should get out. You know, and if you are taking, you should be giving. I understand that principle, but I feel like another principle should be let's stop pissing in the wind and giving people all of these social services when all we have to do is stop taking money from them.
Yep.
You know, let's go all in on the help, and instead of making them pay for the help that they're getting, just give them the fucking help and see how much better we are at it.
Yep, that sounds good to me.
There's an old saying: "Can't get blood from a turnip." If you're taxing people that don't have money, then you're just starving them to death.
Yeah. Number 13, restoring tax rates on the top incomes. Yes. I love it.
Are they not paying taxes in your country?
No, what happened is they used to pay, like, the very top earners in our country used to pay like 50% tax. And they've reduced those tax rates on the top earners. And it basically creates a situation where we have to tax everyone else a higher percentage. So when you're dealing with billionaires, if they make $3 billion and we take $1.5 billion away from them, boo-hoo.
But I mean, if it's a tax system where somebody, like, what is your current tax rate? Is it like 12% or like what's
that in itself is something that you'd have to unpack for hours.
Yeah,
when you consider that we're not just talking about income tax when we're talking about the total tax rate, because we have sales taxes and whatnot.
Yeah.
But if you're just going by income tax, I pay probably close to 30%.
Yeah, I pay about 60.
60%.
Yeah, over half.
And that's income tax, not total tax?
That's total tax. I mean, when I look at how much of my income is grossly taxed, I'm over 60%.
Okay, that's where I would get if I was total tax. When I'm talking about just my income tax,
Income,
like
yeah,
how I file every year, it works out to be about 30%.
yeah. Well, that's the big one. That's the one that really counts. That's the one that hits home.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's proportioned. If it's a set tax rate, they're gonna, like, the rich are already paying more anyway. I mean, I don't like.
Well, the problem is it's not proportioned.
Then that's an issue. I mean, if it's proportionate, if there's a fixed percentage that everybody has to pay, there's an expectation. I mean, obviously, the higher the income, the higher that number is going to be.
You'd hope.
But if they're doing the loopholes or doing the stuff where they're getting around it,
yeah,
right, doing reductions and stuff, and it's not proportional, then that's a problem for sure. I mean, I'm just for everybody paying a proportionate percentage, basically. I mean, and that's going to work out to be bigger numbers as incomes and stuff increase. So I don't like the idea of just saying you're rich, and for being rich, there's the rich tax. You know what I mean? And on top of other taxes, I that's where I start to kind of like, yeah, I don't know. That sounds, and it's a trickle down sort of principle where the state's going to take this much additional money and funnel it down to everybody else. And I'm not even convinced that works anyway. So whenever I hear about additional taxes on the rich, it's like, well, everybody sort of likes that, but
it all sounds nice. Basically, if you want to increase income coming from the rich, go after the deductions. Don't increase the rate. My opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the underlying principle is I don't think we should be punishing people for being successful. That's not to say they shouldn't be paying their fair share. I just mean additional punishments or additional.
Yeah, there's the difference between asking them to pay their fair share and asking them to just, and trying to punish them. And
right.
Just my view though is like the deductions, all right, for the most part, should mostly be focused on the middle class because they're the ones that are close to not being able to pay rent and food, and then they have to have things like a car to go to work, and such. And that's where the deduction should be, is just like things like your transportation to work, stuff you need to make money and put the food on the table should be deductible. But that's for the salary man, the middle class. If you're in the wealthy, look, I've run multiple businesses myself. The whole idea is with business is you're taking a risk. All right, if you can take it back on deduction, then you're not taking a risk, and that's like, okay, there is sort of a Darwin-esque thing about running a business that you are taking the risk, that you are putting yourself out there, and and the more deductions you can take on that, the less you are actually risking yourself. And the Darwin-esque nature of it is that the successful businesses thrive and the failures go away. And the more you can just take it on deductions, the more you can just fuck up.
What's interesting as well is one of the previous planks was essentially underlining rewarding and incentivizing local businesses and startups. So it's like these are essentially the people that are going to be doing that is the people that the risk takers. And I don't, like I said, I'm not for cuts, I'm not for giving these people special privileges, but I don't like the idea of penalties either. It's essentially saying, well, you're successful, there's the success tax, and it's like, well, that's kind of, and then on the other hand, incentivizing, like, what? Okay, well, if you're going to give people rewards, it's like we're going to take this much money from you, but then we're going to give you this much back. And it's like, like why the middleman? Why the? So yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot to that. That's a big debate in itself, I think.
So number 14.
I think, you know, well, my opinion on the incentivizing would be, you know, like a grant or a loan, but that's like a one-time thing at the start to help you get the resources and tools needed to run the business. Not an ongoing things where you can take it off on your taxes. If you buy more tools, you can take it off on your taxes. It's like no. The salary man, yeah, that's one thing, but if you're running a business, no.
Yeah, I don't want state subsidized Microsoft. You know, let's put it that way.
Apparently, the reason why Nick left was that we have airstrikes happening in Syria right now.
Oy.
Like breaking news. And so I have someone in the chat, Stable Genius. He wants some thoughts on that. And I'm like, I have no thoughts on it. I don't know any of the facts, really.
That's the real big kicker in this. It's such a reactionary thing. We don't even know the facts. Like the general public, everybody's kind of walking around shrugging like, what is this? We don't even have all the information.
Mm-hmm.
And we're jumping into a highly high-risk situation that can destabilize international relations. I do not like that one iota. I think that's a huge mistake.
I think this is, you know, my opinion. Again, it's just like the same stuff as like when Bush did the war on terror, and he was like, "Oh, there's chemical weapons in Iran or no Iraq, you know, chemical weapons in Iraq," and there wasn't any. And it's like, you know, oh, Syria did an attack, and it's like, yeah, there are people who have a tendency of staging stuff, so we don't know if that's actually real or in the attack happened, but you know, who did it, you know.
Yeah, well, for those who follow the official state line as far as where the chemical weapons went after Saddam used them, they were shipped to Syria prior to the inspectors getting in. And also on the show yesterday with me was Brian, who said that the British government has evidence that they had the precursors to these chemical weapons because the British government sold them to them.
Yeah, that's atrocious.
So
that's just atrocious.
Yeah. I don't know what to feel about that, but I do know that I'm a little bit more anti-interventionist in the wake of having seen the Gulf Wars and the war in Afghanistan. I'm like, should we intervene? I mean, does anything positive happen from our intervening anywhere? You know.
Well, the thing is that the United States is so far away from what's going on over there that any information we get on that is as a trickle. You know, it's just like even like in the back of the BBS days, it's like the only way we were going to get any information on what's going on over there is somebody sets up a Usenet news feed, which is still part of the internet. And since most people weren't there, it's like maybe a few small handful of people actually knew what was going on. You know, and shit. You know, that's in the BBS days, right? We have such a trickle of information. We're pretty much fucking blind, deaf, and dumb when it comes to what's going on over there. The best news would be just, hey, you know, tell the United Nations, watch out what's going on. You got people, you know, over there anyway. Watch what's going on over there. If you say we should go in, then we'll do that. But it should be on the UN's call, not the United States's, you know, spy network.
Well, I'll say that
bullshit.
In the context of what this stream was supposed to be about, I'm betting that I'm going to hear a lot more about Syria tomorrow while I'm actually in the assembly than anything that's on this platform.
It's a big deal. I mean, this is a really big step that's been taken here.
So my thoughts on this are, all that I'm talking about today will probably have far less to do with the assembly than the news cycle 24 hours prior to the assembly.
Yeah, I could see where that would be the case.
So 14, extending tax credits for children and families in education. I'm in favor, even though it does help rich families too.
Well, I mean, it's yeah, it's not,
Ratified. Well, that can be ratified a little bit. Talk. Work on little details like put caps and bottoms and shit on things. As a basic statement, it sounds good. Just tweak a little, like minimum, maximum income on that, and shit.
Number 15, eliminating the ceiling on income that is subject to Social Security tax. I believe it's somewhere like if you make more than $100,000, everything after $100,000 a year, you don't pay Social Security tax on it. And I would say it would go a long way into assuring solvency for Social Security if we were to upgrade where that ceiling was. Probably double or triple it, but eliminating it would probably do pretty much the same thing.
now wouldn't that also fall under the heading of the previous plank with the progressive sales tax? Like, wouldn't that fall under the heading of a progressive measure that's taken? Like, or is that something that is distinct for a reason? Is that demarcation for?
You're right. It is redundant.
Well, it is quasi redundant because people, because in politics, it's always nitpicky and so you need to spell everything out. Every little dot, every little T has to be crossed, every little I has to be dotted. It's just as I like a saying that has been exclusively to me all the way back to the 1980s is to dot the T's and cross the I's.
Yeah, it's a good practice.
I mean, it's just taken from an old statement of I'll cross the T's and dot the I's, but I reverse it around saying you got to be totally fucking redundant.
So number 16 is assuring the long-term solvency of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and preventing their privatization. I am in favor of 1, 2, 3, and not 4.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the preventing their privatization, my employer has an alternative to Social Security, and I have not been paying into Social Security. I've been paying into a different style of managed fund, which is legal. And it might be hurting Social Security in a way, or at least perceived that way by the Democratic Party. But that's the option I got from my employer. And so by virtue of me working there, I now have a managed fund that's a lot like a 401k. It's a 455 type deal. And so I just, I don't pay into Social Security the same way.
Yeah, no, I'm all for people being able to make their own decisions regarding their future investments and their. I don't have a problem with Social Security per se. I just don't like the idea of preventing people that have other options from utilizing
exercising other options. Yeah, this
right.
is just a thought. Going back to the 15 item, right? A little thought on that is, people who are making a lot of money, all right, tend to fund their own retirement, and and then putting this requiring them to pay into Social Security. I mean, there's one side of that's good for Social Security, and that can help keep it going and make it work, and keep it from like we'll have to do have to cut for the for those who are on Social Security over and over again. That would prevent that. On the other hand, it's just like you've got an increased number of people who are going to be paying in that won't be pulling out. And I think that that second item may be a redundant to the thing that AOD was referring to on the since he already scrolled past, I can't see what it is. My brain forgets everything. But the previous item, the second item, 16, I think, the last on the 16 item, is that is this the same idea? It was like, as long as maybe it's like as long as people have the choice to put in for put into their own retirement, to handle their own retirement on their own, and not say, oh, you're legally not allowed to handle your own retirement, right? It's as long as you're allowed to handle your own retirement. Asking people to pay into Social Security could still buff it up, but you might want to like have still a limitation on that. So like if you're handling your own Social Security and you're below a certain income after the company is handling your Social Security, handling your retirement. Sorry, wrong word. If the company is handling your retirement, putting into a retirement thing, and privatizing your retirement, and you're below a certain income level after that thing, then maybe you shouldn't have to pay into Social Security. But after a certain income level, then Social Security needs the support. But it's not helpful if you're just throwing it in to for people who don't have the money to throw in.
Welcome, Jordy, to Canadians telling Americans how to run their country.
I'm not here to say shit. I'm fucking hammered. Hello.
God bless you, or Goddess bless you, since I'm waking up.
Falanoid, it's been fucking years. It's been years.
I've been busy.
I'm glad. Good. The less time we spend on the internet, the better.
I'm still on the internet, but I'm not chatting. I'm just.
I know, but it's been an eternity.
So Anonymous has suggested a new platform plank in the chat. She says, "I hope this orange clown of a president dies screaming in fear and pain all alone."
Well, that would be at least a clearly articulated plank.
Yeah.
That would be nice. I mean, it's at least we know the full implications, and we can take in full import of what that is implying without having to do additional research.
Just to cover my ass, I say I won't support or denounce that position.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say something to just as an addendum to this? I mean, we have a very our tax system works a little better. I think Canada's a little more progressive in terms of its taxation and social insurance than the US is. One thing I would say, and this is something that comes up here, and it's something I think to take note of, is that with our system, even though we pay a lot into, say, for example, CPP, that's a Canadian pension plan, and there's constant threats that we're going to lose that what we've paid into it. So my generation that's paid into this for the previous generation might not see the same things, and they encourage people to make their own investments. And if you look at the treatment of the elderly, the middle class elderly, or the more vulnerable income elderly in a lot of the retirement homes here, it's deplorable. My advice would be to anybody is to not take care. It's to not rely on the government and to make your own investments. And I think if they're going to handicap or tax or penalize investments you make, or even outright prevent them, I think that's a big mistake. I think people should be able to take additional steps outside of the state and make their own decisions with that. And I think it would be wise to do so. That's just my little input on that.
Well, we've gotten another 4 hours of this look at the platform done, and so far I'm on page 8.
It's a lot. It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and but there wasn't as many bad things in this section, that I really did feel like I was in favor of. But I still feel like being able to vote line by line would be a better, just a better system. And I've experienced that system before in a different political party. And so I hope to bring that expertise to the Democrats tomorrow, but I'm at least going to film how they all, like sheep, vote to enact these platform planks without any discussion whatsoever. And then I'm going to put video of that up on my YouTube channel. And I'm going to see what I can do about that in the future to make sure that there actually is a reviewing of the platform, not just an emailing of an attachment out to all the delegates, and then trusting that they read it, within the week before and researched the whole thing, because I haven't even researched the 8 pages we've gone through.
Yeah, I think that's a worthy cause for sure.
And yeah, I have to get some sleep before I go do this tomorrow. So I'm going to prepare my cameras, make sure they're charged, and have empty video cards in them. And I'm just going to call this show and say, I will read the rest of the planks at least, and have 1 or 2 thoughts about each line. But that's as much as I can give it because time has run out. I've at least given this 8 hours of my life, which is probably 8 more hours than any of my fellow delegates has given it, publicly or privately. And I do promise to read all of the planks before going in to see that vote.
Well, you were kind of given a crap sandwich and expected to have it finished in no time, and I think that's that's the biggest problem with this whole thing. The most immediate problem I can see with that. It's just there's obviously no respect for the delegation process if that's the methodology they're going to use, and I think that's again, I don't think that strengthens the party. I think that weakens it. I think it hurts the party.
Just to skim through on this final show before the vote, we've got a section on corporate responsibility, which is basically occupiers not liking corporations. We've got fair trade. We've got a whole section on housing, job creation, economic solutions, and social justice, like raising the minimum wage to a living wage and removing sales tax on food. Just a whole laundry list of things that are pretty much the planks on economics and social justice that you would have seen in the Occupy protests. Veterans Affairs stuff, which I think would also be probably things you'd see in the Republican platform.
Yep.
To be honest.
That's a big issue.
Mining, agriculture, and business and local affairs stuff. Transportation. Labor.
It looks like really basic
pretty standard stuff from now on. Stuff about education, stuff about, let's see, war education. That was 2 pages on education. Environment, energy, and conservation.
It feels like basic Democratic talking points.
Yeah, the rest of this feels pretty standard. But I will read every one of these lines.
As you should, Mr. Responsible.
Yes.
Go, Mike. Thank God.
Healthcare.
Thank God for you.
and I'm just going to say, look at this. We support universal coverage.
Yeah.
It says including Medicare, Medicaid for all.
That'd be sick.
Yeah, I think you guys desperately need that. I think that's something that's really lacking there. I mean, we have
Welcome to Canada.
yeah. Well, yeah, we have I have complaints about the system we have. There's faults in it, but man, I'll take it over what the US is currently going
Just
through.
skimming through this.
Straight after that.
This is something that I don't really know that this should be a platform plank. You can see it right there. It's
The opioid
CTE,
crisis? Oh.
chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
No.
Basically, Will Smith made a movie about concussions and football,
But
and
that's a rights issue. That's a civil-
Democrats and people who love social justice hate football,
They hate mixed martial arts.
and they hate mixed martial arts, but they especially hate football. And you know the whole the president having a problem with Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem,
Yep.
and the NFL basically siding with the president and the social justice warriors siding with Kaepernick. Now they're actually putting in their platform planks. You know what? All those concussions and that
No.
Yeah.
chronic CTE stuff, we need to start legislating against that.
No. You let adults do whatever the fuck they want. If they want to get punched or kicked in the head or get knocked down by 300-pound men to make $1 billion, then so be it. Fuck it. I don't care. If they're willingly doing it, I don't care. Ah,
So
And as-
the opioid crisis thing, I like that that's in there.
that's a good one.
That's a good one. Healthy food, good stuff. And then healthy democracy stuff.
All very basic democratic talking points.
Yes, campaign finance reform, immigration, basic democratic thing, right?
Yep.
Departments of State, Defense, and Homeland Security. There's basically a plank in here that says we're to end all wars as soon as we possibly can. But this is actually like specific countries and how we should treat them. Normalize relations with Cuba, oppose Russian government's anti-democratic values and actions to undermine democratic governments in that nation as well as abroad. So that's the Russia.
Yep, we got a little Russia in there, a little of our.
Yeah, that's the very last thing that's in this. The end.
Yeah. Well, that's the note they ended on Russia.
Yes,
So
Russia.
is this specific to your little branch there, Mike, or is this like
This is the state.
the state
assembly.
of Colorado?
Yes,
Okay.
this is the Colorado Democratic Party platform.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because I walked in halfway through and I'm half hammered, so like I just needed some context. Sorry.
Well, I love that we have drunk Canadians that can criticize the U.S.
Well, like, he just declared war were declared just right now, so I don't know what to say. Mike,
What
I
do,
don't know what to say.
what do you mean war was declared?
War were declared. Something about Syrian bombings or something. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I should probably watch the news tonight before I go to this assembly.
I mean, like when you have multiple countries bombing one country, that's not a good thing. No.
So I'm going to go and watch the news, charge my cameras, and make sure my video cameras have memory cards that are blank so that I can get the full assembly. And thank you guys for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone, for watching.
I've been here for 10 minutes.
All right.
Yeah, take care, Mike.
Take care.
Take care, Mike.
Good day, everyone.